The world is listening to smoothjazz.com.
Airline pilot with jazz superpowers, pianist Paul Tuvman returns with a very special new project. In My Life, a tribute to the music of the Beatles.
You're doing amazing.
A battle of life or death at this point in time. And we see that these communists who we're dealing with in big tech, they literally want us dead. First, they want to try to kill us in a digital manner by subjecting us to a digital gulag. But look what they're doing in the countries which they're outsourcing all of their manufacturing to. And in these countries like China, where they're getting all of their executives and people to serve on their board. They literally have Muslims in concentration camps in China. And these big tech social media companies are utilizing slave labor from the Muslim Uyghurs to produce their products. Okay. So these people really are evil. They want us dead. Okay. They have demonstrated that in the way that they label us dangerous individuals and then tell people that it's okay to kill dangerous individuals. So nobody's doing anything about it. I completely feel your pain. Okay, I've expressed the same frustrations, and that is why it is so important that I win. Okay, and I'm going to win. It's the only option. It is the only option, because if this continues, well, you know, there's really not going to be an America, as you constantly repeat on your show, Alex. There is not going to be an America if we allow for these tyrants in Silicon Valley to rob us of our First Amendment right.
Because, Laura, that's really true. Big tech claims it's all liberal and it censors conservatives or Christians because they're loving. Meanwhile, they help China run death camps. That is so sick. That is so crazy that that's who these people are. These people are monsters. They should be absolutely called out. The FBI should be arresting them.
Yeah, they should. And you want to know, if we had people in Congress who had a spine and a backbone to do it, it would be happening, because it is a crime. It is a crime to lie to Congress. Okay, Sundar, Sheryl Sandberg, Jack Dorsey, Mark Zuckerberg, they all committed perjury when they testified under oath to Congress, when they lied and said that they don't censor conservatives.
Oh, we were there together when they said we don't even track users.
Yep, and then the day after.
I know all y'all know this. Representative and republic go together. When you see republic, it means that you have given up your right to vote, or you never had the right to vote. And a representative must speak for you, and you remain silent. That is a republic. We, amongst the Moors, do not have a republic form of government. We created a republic form of government for someone else. For them. So this automatically tells you that there was a problem with the Jacobian experiment back then. Tells you. The rise of the republic, you've heard stories about the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. The rise of the republic was because of the Jacobian experiment. And you hear stories about the Jacobian experiment, and these stories were known as myths about these hideous creatures, like the centaur and all those kinds of creatures. Minotaur, all those creatures are the results, are the stories from your Jacobian experiment. The cream of the crop of those Jacobian experiments began to walk on 2 feet, and the problem existed back then. So the Moors implemented this experiment called the Republic for the very first time to give these one of the Yacubian experiment a form of government which was a representative form of government, which at the same time minimized their power. Gave them a structure, but minimized their power because they did not have rights. They had representatives who spoke to the sovereign on their behalf. And I want to direct you to this movie because it's a movie that I just recently saw. It's a Disney cartoon. Lilo and Stitch.
On the album now today, she said, she says, everybody in the movie was crying.
Yes. Everybody in the movie was crying. And they had the Queen of the Supreme Council who comes and sets everything straight in the end and grants the little creature exile on planet Earth. Let me tell you. It is a Yacubian experiment told too well in a cartoon.
That's how you know. And then they said it's for the kids, but how do the kids, I mean, she said everybody, the mother,
Children cannot understand that movie.
And they were crying. I said,
They can deal with the emotionalness and things like that. But the overall science and the overall story that's being told in the movie with this little creature, why do you think he's called Stitch? He was put together from different pieces of animals. The man was like a Frankenstein. And that's why he's called Stitch. You don't understand that either. No, they don't see the science, but when you see it, you're going to know. Now, here's the myth. What happened to Rome? It fell, didn't it? The rise and the fall. What caused the fall of Rome?
too much party.
Why did the Republic fall? Well, you know what? That's what was said. That the Romans became so extravagant and full of themselves and didn't want to work and had all this luxury and had orgies and all this other kind of stuff like that there, and they weren't paying attention to their government. And that's how they fell. But that's not true. That's not how they fell. They weren't. The animals. The Republic was set up. Now, Rome was an empire of Moors. This is before Catholicism, because most people associate Rome with Catholicism. But Rome was an empire under the Moors. Catholicism came much later. Okay? And Rome fell. If you've seen the movie Gladiators, you see the story unfold that Rome was an imperial form of government. And the Caesars decided to set up the Republic, and they had these senators. And the senators did what to Caesar? Betrayed him. They betrayed him, and they seized control of the government.
See,
right?
a little of the czars, like the czar of Russia.
Czar and Caesar, one and the same thing. Okay? Yes. So now, they seized control of the government, so the Republic took over the empire. You understand? They betrayed Caesar. He gave them a chance. Why? Because they were bastard children, bastard elves. And he gave them a chance. The nobles gave them the chance and set up this form of government for these Yacubian experiments. And they grew in power, and they used this republic to create the fall of the Roman Empire. Make no mistake, the Roman Empire was ours, but the Roman Republic is something else. They're two separate things. All right? The Republic grew to overshadow the empire and appeared to be the empire, and it wasn't. Just like the United States Republic now shadows over the United States and appears to be the United States, and it's not. Yes, Charlotte?
That movie Gladiator would give a good adaptation of the Roman Empire and the Roman Republic.
Yes. Yes, it's a very good movie for explaining how, but they make the emperor's son appear to be the bad guy, when he's the one that's trying to hold on to the empire. Octavius. And make the gladiator, who was a slave, Yacubian experiment, the hero. Because he's fighting for what? The Republic. And they even let you think that the emperor talking to this Yakubian experiment tells him you must fight to make Rome a republic again. That's what he tells them. The republic was taken away from them. Their charter was removed from them, and he's telling this gladiator, you have to fight to restore the republic.
Spartacus is another movie.
Spartacus is another one, right? Very good, very good. Spartacus is another one. So, what caused the fall of the republic? The Roman Republic. Okay, first of all, how did the republic get there? How was it established? Through the Moors. How? How did the Moors set up the republic?
Gave a constitution.
Gave them a constitution. See, this is interesting. Watch this. The rise into it, they gave him a constitution. Now, how did they fall? They were given a constitution. They were granted a constitution, and a constitution is also a charter. Chartering them to conduct business as a government, as a republic form of government. Now, how did they fall? Yes, Jeremiah?
They start taxing everything, taxing everybody and all.
That's how Rome fell?
How does that?
No.
They start to intermingle, like
These are, now, the republic is the Yakubian experiment.
Right, all of them.
All of them, okay? Yes.
I say it's revoked.
The charter was revoked. The Moors revoked the charter. Constitution. You see where we're going with this, right? You see it coming, don't you? You see it coming, don't you?
Doing the same thing.
Okay. It's coming. It's coming faster than I thought.
So that's the real reason why they have all this controversy about saying the Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh, yeah. That's why this right here. See this? Here, you got this? Oh, they're begging to plead. But they have these poor children and these poor people thinking that they're saying the Pledge of Allegiance with their head on their heart. What are they really saying? Mom! Got a whole page of them here. A whole bunch of them. Look, page after page. Oh, Islam. Oh, we're so sorry. Oh, we know the mother's coming back and, you know, oh, you can't see this picture right here. A whole bunch of little children in Islam.
they show the one the capital.
The capital, the city. Oh, we're so sorry. Now the mother's coming back and all we can do is say we're sorry.
Not good.
And please have mercy.
So what's the gagging rule?
Don't take our republic from us, Lord, please.
Is that why these big corporations are starting to steal and hoard and hide this money because they know something is going to happen?
Something is coming. And when she comes, she's coming with a storm they'll never forget. Okay, here we go. Now that's Rome. At the hands of the Moors. Now, number 2. The Republic, they had to fight to exist. So you see, the United States wasn't the first republic. Rome was the first republic. The United States Republic replaced that one.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay? They took it away. They took the Constitution away, and it wasn't until 1776,
Yeah.
what? Almost 1,000 years later, did they get it again. Fight to exist. Yes.
The fall, they always say that the
Follow the more.
not fall, the fall Rome.
Right.
They always attribute to the Second Punic War when Hannibal took over when it came to Carthage.
Yes.
So they say it's
But Hannibal lost the last Punic War.
But they always say that the second one helped with it. They said that the decline of Rome started when they lost the Second Punic War, even though they won the
served? Because there was 3 of them. So,
Yes.
but they said that the second battle that they had, they said that the second battle that they had, which when Hannibal came from Carthage,
Yeah.
they said that that started the fall, even though they were able to rebuild themselves and fight them back, but after that they were never the same again.
They were never the same. Right. 3 huge wars, and Hannibal, I want to say Bakar, that family name, he won 1 and lost 2 after it. He won the second. He lost the first one, won the second, and lost the third. What was won and lost is the question.
Right.
How were they defeated? And it was like this. Hannibal obviously was a Moor. There's never been any question about his heritage whatsoever. And when he, from Carthage, one of the things you need to know is where Carthage is. Do you know where Carthage is? You know where Rome is. You should know where Rome is. Right. Where's Carthage? It can't be too far.
Right.
You gotta be in Virginia.
Well, what was Virginia at that time? You see, because all these states we now know as Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, was all Virginia.
All Virginia, right, from Maine to Boston, right?
Yeah, all the way to the Pacific. Now, so the question is, where is Carthage? Not where was Carthage. Where is Carthage today? You don't know. Nobody has a guess. Then Pennsylvania. Oh, he crossed the Alps? Yes, he did that. Huh? Yes. It's now, it already tells you what it is. It's a bird. So now, he came from there because what did he have to get, what did he have to solve was the issue with the bird. So put these things of these experiments back where they belong. That's what the whole issue was. Okay, so that's the war that was won and lost, is do they get to live outside the bird or not? Okay? Now, the fight to exist, because most of these from the experiment are illiterate. They cannot read or write. So if the mass of your population, coming from here, from the experiment, cannot read or write, how do you get the information to them? Remember, books were rare for them. How was the information getting to them? By word of mouth. Now, how long does that take for news to travel word of mouth? Years. Because remember, they didn't have telephones and internet and automobiles and planes, right? And TV and radio. They didn't have all of that. So it would take a long time for news to travel from place to place. Okay? So, in order for them to exist, to even set up the republic, say dealing with the United States, one of the problems they had to solve was the illiteracy. They had to find a venue to teach these people to read and write, because it was prohibited even for them to read and write. They switched it around, that it was illegal for them to read and write. So their whole fight to exist, to even set up a republic, is a big uphill battle. That's what I want you to, the picture I want you to see. This was not an easy task by any stretch of the imagination. Could not possibly be. The other thing is, not only were they illiterate, most of them were illegitimate. Yes. And one of the reasons that so many of them were illegitimate was because it was illegal for them to marry. There was no system set up that allowed them to marry. That's why they would have a first name, and then their last name, they would be referred to as so-and-so's son. And you see this predominant in the Berber culture. You're familiar with it, how they say Ibn means son, somebody's son. Okay.
No, like
Right, McDonald means son of. Right.
Esau Ibn Maryam. It's supposed to be Jesus, son of Mary.
Okay, you see, so that it means son of. So why do you have to be known as son of somebody? The reason is because they had no surname.
I was just watching the movie of 13 Quarter, and that's what his name is. Even somebody. He tells them, I'm the son of.
Right, and that's why, because they were not allowed to have surnames. Surnames imply legitimacy. Surnames imply that everybody knows you have a mother, but a surname implies that you have a father. Because everyone knows you come from your mother. But a surname means you have a father. So they weren't allowed to have surnames.
Jackson.
Jack, son. Jefferson, son. Maddie, son. John, son. Exactly. There you go. Okay. Right. That's where all that is coming from. All right. They were illegitimate.
But how did we get all those Jacksons, Harrisons, Johnsons?
Because we left our family names. We left our family names. All right. So they had a big fight to exist. The next thing is the silent partner. Of course, we talked about this before. Number 3, the silent partner. You know who that is. The silent partner, of course, is the Moors. And more often than not, it's a father. And the reason it's a father is because the heritage and the inheritance comes from the mother's bloodline. So those bastard children who had fathers who were Moors had no inheritance and no birthright. They could not own land, things like that. They could not vote. They could not inherit anything that was the father's wealth.
Because the father was loose.
The father was
Loose.
loose. Yeah. Eventually, when we get a little further down the line, you're going to see what the mothers did too. But the fathers who started the damage, it was the mothers who finished the damage of the fall of the Moorish Empire. Okay?
They surely did.
They surely did. Okay? So they had aid from the Moors, from their fathers, because they could not file lawsuits on their own. They could not file lawsuits in court. They had no right. So they could not file any lawsuits. You know they could not vote. And no land ownership. Couldn't have that either. So they had to have a partner to do everything that they did. So in other words, in order for a republic to exist, Moors have to be present in the background to cause that to happen. People with no status can't do that to begin with. They have no place to begin. They have no place to start, so they can't get there. That's still true today.
That's right. Controlling power and stuff like that.
Right. They put them in selected positions. Only in modern times, let's say the past 30 years, have you been seeing them openly in the press. But if you were to go to a state dinner at the White House, almost everybody who works in that White House is Asiatic. And has been that way since the property's been there. Okay? So now, the silent partner, that is the Moors, has to stay in the background and give the appearance that it's the people who are fighting for the Republic who are really doing all the deeds. because it's a secret that the Moors have that they are really the parents who brought these beings into existence. And remember, we talked about in the Revolutionary War class that it was against the law, and still is, to have sex with animals. So if they were to come forward and fight openly with these people, with these beings, that would be an admission that they were guilty of that crime, and therefore being forced to come to court. But now, most of these fathers, I would venture to say all of these fathers, were, remember I discussed with you what it meant to be in rebellion against the court, against the government, and what happens when you're in rebellion? What is that called? Remember also you answered it? Okay. They committed a crime. They refused to show up to court, so what happens? A bench warrant was issued. And a bench warrant is called what? It's a warrant of rebellion. So when the colonies, quote unquote, colonies are in rebellion, what are they saying? That these fathers have been summoned to court to answer for the crime of having sex with animals, and they didn't show, they didn't appear, so bench warrants were issued for them. And a bench warrant is a warrant of rebellion. So when the colonies were in rebellion, that's what happened. These fathers didn't show up to court, and bench warrants were issued. So now, fighting for the Republic has to be in silence. Those fathers have to fight in silence, because if they show their face, they'll be arrested. Because how did this being get here anyway? There's a father somewhere. Okay? Because they see who the mothers are. The mothers are Albion. They live in the burbs and everything like that. They know who the mothers are, but who are those fathers? See, that's always an elusive question, particularly when you're dealing with man and animals. It's hard to pinpoint the father. Okay?
But they didn't any resemblance to the father? Did they have any worship?
I would venture to say yes, they did, but understand, when you're talking man and man,
right,
woman and a man having a child, that's one thing. But when you're talking about a man and an animal, that's why you need to see that movie Lilo and Stitch, because this creature was like a little bit of everything. A little bit of everything, but he was pretending to be a dog. So he didn't really look like a dog, but he had the ability to change his appearance somewhat. That's what I want to point out. Did you see Men in Black? And in the very beginning of the movie, they stopped the van, and they got these people in the back seat, and then he says, which one you got your money on? Which one do you think is the alien here? He says, I don't know. Right? Spanish woman, the last one, just kept nodding his head, yeah. So then he brings them down away from the others, and then, he says, do something, put out all your flippers. He said, first of all, give me that head. Remember, he was all squatted down, so the head up above like that. So he snatched the head from him, and then when the police officer came and saw him, he said, and he turned around and was chasing. But remember how he came out of his disguise, and he had all those flippers and everything. So this little creature, Stitch, is a little, he's not as gross, but he's a little like that. So he tucks in his arms, and he down his fins and in his antenna and everything, so he resembles more like a dog. Okay? So now, my point is, prior to answering your question, when you have a creature that is such a mix, first of all, even before man was involved, they were mixed with a variety of animals. So let's take that into consideration first of all. So you take a creature that's a mix between a variety of animals, then you put a man in the form of man. So it would be very difficult to look at the man and look at the creature and say that's your child. That's my point. Because they could have so many variations of things. You know what I'm saying? Okay.
She said, Dad.
Yeah. That kind of thing. the ones helping them all along? Yes.
So they actually
Yes.
themselves helping their children.
Yes, that's what they were doing. That's what they were doing.
No, they were avoiding it.
Avoiding persecution.
And avoiding persecution. So I would say the primary motive was not so much of setting up the republic, was not so much to help their children as it was to put a governmental system in place whereby they could avoid the jurisdiction of the Moors. So what they would do is set up the republic, and the republic now has a court, I'm going to get to that later, that has jurisdiction. So now they can say to the Moors, you don't have jurisdiction over me, I'm over here.
Wow.
So they can avoid prosecution under the Moor system of government. That's the motive for setting up the republic.
Moors agreeing to be under the republic system.
So that they can avoid prosecution. And now we're reversing that, aren't we?
Right.
Now, so many of our people, but they don't know what else to do. They say, well, you don't have jurisdiction. Well, who has jurisdiction? Well, I don't know. But I know I'm not under your jurisdiction, okay? So now, that's the same thing that's being in reverse now, okay? We're saying, we're not under your jurisdiction. We have our own. For the first time in what? Hundreds of years must be, we have our own jurisdiction. We have our own jurisdiction. All of you can stand up and give yourselves a hand right now. We have our own and I'm going to show you why that is so important, like I used to tell you, right? Alright? The humble beginning. The humble beginning, how did they get so many people to follow them? And then I will put right here motive, what I just said. Motive. Fathers avoid prosecution. Okay, now we're in another jurisdiction. The humble beginning that they started with, they professed humility. That's all they could profess. They profess simplicity. You see it in all of the colonial architecture. They say they remove all of the gorgeous trimmings on the building, all of the elaborate architecture. They just wanted everything plain and simple and direct and to the point with nothing fancy. That Puritan ethic. Don't even want to have buttons on your clothes. That's too outlandish. You want to have the flap in front and put your buttons on the inside. They couldn't even have buckles on the shoes. You understand what I'm saying? That simplicity. And why did they make that the fashion statement of the time? A number of reasons, okay? Because that's all they were capable of having. If they were capable of having more, of course they would have had more. They did not have the capacity to have that. As you said, they did probably, their fingers couldn't button a button. That's correct. Right. We call them all terrain.
You know, when you look at the Amish, I don't care what time of year they are white. All year long. With the hair and the bun, since you said that over there. Why do people still white?
And they're dying off.
Yeah. So they done crossbreed themselves from all that. And everybody wears sneakers. Right. Old men and children. I want to do that. Yeah.
And so they profess simplicity, and the other thing, simplicity and moderation.
Right.
There you go. That's where the Quakers come in, with the Friends and all that stuff like that. Simplicity, moderation, and humility. Because that's where they were coming from. Out of the birth. That was the order of the day. All right? So then, number 5. Let me just say this, finish with number 4. With this type of marketing strategy, they could attract a lot of people because they appear to be so gearing towards poverty that it's okay to be poor. It's okay to do without and all those things like that. So they were pushing an idea basically whose time had come because the push was that afford all that extravagance that the Moors had. Right. We don't live in those fabulous houses. We don't have those elaborate carriages and those estates and this and that. So if the theme of the day is simplicity, humility, and moderation, oh yeah, we'll jump on that bandwagon because that's where we are. Financially, economically, that's where we are. All right? So it's okay to be that way so they could get a lot of people to join, get on the bandwagon, with that being the order of the day, and that was the purpose of it. Okay? Now, they grow and grow and grow. Let's talk about their growth and expansion. I'm going to surprise you with this one. What mechanism did those who were fighting for the Republic use to grow and expand so fast and so wide? What one thing did they get a hold of that allowed them tremendous growth and expansion? Only one thing.
Mainframe growth.
It wasn't the science.
Religion.
I think it's the mainframe. It wasn't religion. Wasn't economic. They married, but before they even married, there was something that had to happen before they could even marry anymore. What systems did they learn to control? I just told you, basically. No. Court. The court. They got to have their own court. Because in the imperial system, they couldn't even file a lawsuit. See, that's why this jurisdictional issue is so important. When they were allowed to set up their own court, they could easily say to us, we're not under your jurisdiction. We're under our own jurisdiction. Right? So now,
The Battelle.
yeah, the Battelles were in the court because they started setting up their own court. Now, here you go. Once they were able to set up the court, they could do everything else. They could get a land grant under their court because the court decision, boom, we issue that land grant to you. They could marry because, boom, before it was against the law, now we rule, this. It wasn't through getting elected in government. Through the court, they could decide who could run for office and who couldn't. Through the court, they could decide who could vote in their system and who couldn't. Who could even get registered in their system and who couldn't. Right? Through their court, they could decide who could live where. They could foreclose property for tax liens. Sound familiar? Look at all the things they could do through the court.
And still do.
And still do. This is the power. Make no mistake. The power of any nation or any country is derived from one thing and one thing only, their court system. It's not through money. And you see, this is why, and everybody's all, when are we getting our money? When are we getting our money? Well, I'll tell you what. We will get our money as soon as our court system is in place. Because now we have a mechanism to declare and to issue court orders. Think of the power of that. Think of the power of this. Somebody get a traffic ticket, something so simple. You challenge and we say, yeah, we're not in your jurisdiction. And that worked out fine. But what if we say, we're not in your jurisdiction us, you got to go to our court. And guess what else? You got to pay.
Right.
So you take the power back.
Huh?
Right.
We're taking the power.
We take the power back. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
This is the power right here. This is us, right here. Right here. But who knew? First of all, that's where the power is. Everybody thinks power, first of all, you think you have to have money. Now, should be, after last week's class, I believe, money is not what you thought it was. Right? Remember I told you how to follow that check in the whole circle that it travels? And you thought that was money. And you thought the Federal Reserve notes was money. Now you find out you're carrying around a bunch of debt notes. And where's the money? Can't tell you that. However, when we set up this court, all these people in the world are going to be bowing at our feet.
Right.
Because the Moors, I can't even tell you when the last time the Moors had a court.
All right, German here.
Who?
German over here.
I can't tell you the last time the Moors had a court. Anybody know?
Last time.
Prior to.
One of the fathers responded to the vision one.
Prior to
Oh yeah? Oh yeah? One of these fathers right here.
Probably.
They fought to dismantle the court because they didn't want to have to be brought up on charges.
Right.
And those charges, if found guilty, the penalty would have been death.
And those are people who fight to keep that system in place.
They're the same people who fight to keep the Republican power today. You're right. They're the descendants of those very same people.
Well, you're Colin Powell.
That's right.
You're Colin Powell.
Okay? Control of the court. Now, how else do they grow and expand so fast? Somebody said it before, with control of the financial system.
Every time you say that, I'm just thinking, here's the person that was made up of nothing animal. And he's in control of the financial system, the court system. The brain came from the court came from the
Moors did it.
Yeah.
The Moors did it for them. I'm going to show you something a little bit later. Okay, I'm going to show you something very short. Control of the financial system. Now, when we say control of the financial system, you think we're talking debt notes. We're not talking debt notes. You think we're talking money. We're not talking money. When you have control of in order to get control of the financial system, you have to have control of something else first. What is the one thing you must control before you can control finances? Land. How do you get control of land?
Land grant through court.
Dollars straight
through their court.
Through their court. You see that? You can't get here. I should put that in between. I should put control of land.
So they were giving
So
themselves
that's
deeds.
1, 2, and 3. Okay? Right.
Now,
They were giving themselves deeds.
was this after, say for instance, if they couldn't marry the Moorish woman,
Right?
then they would turn around and get control of the land?
Let me tell you what they would do. If they couldn't marry the Moorish woman, because marriage is in here too.
Right, she controls
Okay.
the land.
If they couldn't do that, if they couldn't marry her through the court, they would issue tax assessment
Right.
and then foreclose on her property. Then give it to one of their own as a homestead or something like that. Okay. They had their ways, but they had to get power over the court first. That's the primary thing, right there. Then through the court, they can get the land, and from having control of the land, they can control the financial system, and that's where they are today. But it's slowly trickling away by trying to hold sand in your fist. You know how tight you try to hold sand in your fist, and even the tighter you hold it, the more
More seeds out, yeah.
out like that. That's what's happening to them right now.
Bonanza, the Western, comes to Ponderosa.
Right.
For example,
Right, well, that's how they got the Ponderosa.
Right. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Martha Stewart,
Okay.
example of
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Oh, yeah. She's going to jail.
She's She's trying to hold on to that thing.
Oh, is she? Did she file bankruptcy?
No, they're trying to get her. They're trying to sell her out. Before the big inside the trade. Inside the trade.
Oh, I didn't know that. I just bought some sheets, Mark Stewart, the other day.
She wants you to buy it. She needs that money.
If it turns out it's short,
She dumped a lot of stock the day before the FCC came down on this corporation, which made they had hidden billions of dollars. All right.
oh, Martha.
Yeah.
Martha, not Martha. She's a big homemaker.
I know. The big one, big homemaker.
Yeah, my grandma always said there's a lot of devilment up under the skirt.
So, the commercial question that says, honey, the Moors want to go, honey, the Moors need a sitter.
Oh, I don't know.
And then now it's the Stewards.
Yeah, who's the steward?
Yeah, he's in the back of the van.
Right.
Yeah. I'm a commercial person.
That's very interesting. Because Queen Elizabeth II is the steward, her last name is Stewart. Okay, here we go. Now, of course, through that, then we have marriage. And with marriage, I'm going to put next, I'm going to put through childbirth. Because eventually, when they had control of the courts, even though the mothers weren't Moors and they may not have been married, the illegitimate children could successfully sue in court for their inheritance. Okay, because with the court, they could get a whole bunch of everything else. Child support. Right, and the most important thing was the inheritance. From those rich Moorish fathers. So this is how they grew and expanded so fast and so wide. And the next thing is, if you have those things, the court and this and that, the next thing is the military. So now they have the whole package is complete. That's already outlawed.
Yeah. What's that?
We don't have to put that on the book. That's still the law.
What's that?
Marriage with animals. It's unlawful. I mean, sex with animals is unlawful.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure.
Yes. It's against the law. So anytime you have a child,
It's a statute.
and you look at the child. You understand that? But also understand that it's not the child's fault. So once the child is here, you punish the Moor, but then you still have to deal with the child. You still have to provide for the child. All right. Number 6, the dirty secrets. Now, we went all the way up, now we're bringing them down. That's number 6. 6. Dirty laundry, dirty secrets. Not only is it a secret, it's a dirty little secret. The primary dirty little secret that they have is what? Let's go back to item number 5. What's the primary dirty secret? What's the primary way that they grew? The court. The court.
There's nothing really on there. Minimal electricity and places like that.
They have internet in the school.
They have internet everywhere.
They have internet everywhere. So let's say that 100 million people have access to the internet. Can we say that?
Yeah.
100 million have access, even though they may not have it at home. They have it at the library, right? They have it at school, they have it at work, okay? All right, in some restaurants, okay, you can go. How do you listen to 100 million people talk? Wait a minute, there's only 280 million in the whole country. How do you listen to 100 million people talk? You can't.
You do, but because they have keywords.
You do. Wait. Don't say you do, but. I want you to tell me how you listen to 100 million people.
Okay, what I'm saying is they got a big computer system set up for government that keywords appeal into listening. Have you seen anything better?
Okay, let's say out of 100 million people, 100,000 of them at one time entered the word terrorist on the internet.
What
say it's not.
What happens?
Who was reading? Who's reading it?
What happens is, there's no way they can compile the information. No way.
They can't even gather it.
They can't gather it.
My
And that's
point
what they
is
asked him about.
they can't even gather that kind of information.
Yeah, but they asked him about, they had the information before the bombing of the trade tower.
They're trying to cover that lie.
There's no
They said they had the
way
information,
they
right?
can monitor
But
that
they
much.
couldn't. They couldn't.
Look, even in one
There's so much
company,
information.
they have to randomly monitor email because they would need one person for every person they employ to listen and pay attention to what that one person is doing.
That's what happened.
Don't say.
Oh, wait,
I have 10 people in my company, and 10 people have access to the internet. Now I have to hire 10 more people to watch those 10. Now, who's watching the 10 that I hired to watch them?
That's what I'm saying.
Can you say?
I'm saying, the information came in wasn't enough people to
But it wasn't
compile.
no information, it's a lie.
You know what I mean?
No.
Why they can't find the lie then?
The whole thing.
Why I can't find that line?
If they can hear it, they should go right to where he at and say, yo, come on out here.
Remember they couldn't find Saddam Hussein?
Now, they're coming again, they're looking for me again for sign. They forgot about it. Did you get Bush? Bush was coming? He declared an all-out manhunt for Saddam Hussein. Yeah.
You want to
A
kill
couple
them?
weeks ago. Yeah, no wonder they're afraid.
But my point is, right, they cannot even gather that volume of information. Let me just tell you why. Say somebody like me, I don't use the internet every day. But if I get on the internet and I'm on a project, a subject,
Right.
I'll be on that internet 3, 4, 5 hours. Right? That's just me.
Right.
Okay? Now, what they would have to do is monitor mine 100% of the time, because you never know when I'm going to sit down and get on there, right? And there's no mechanism that says, that clicks on, oh, she's on the internet. But even if they had that, somebody would have to be dedicated to that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just for me. I'm not saying they don't do it, because I know they do, for me. However, it is of no use.
Right?
Right? It is of no use, and I'm going to tell you this right now, that if you're working on the internet, which we discussed the other day, all you have to do is click that modem off. Now what have you got? Nothing. Click the modem off and work offline, boom, boom, boom. Right? You can put your whole message onto a disk, download it to a disk, go to the local Kinko and send it to who you want. So, what? Right? How are you monitoring all that information? It is not possible.
Well, what I was saying is,
Brainwash people and scare.
this is the lack thereof.
It's the lack thereof. You're absolutely right.
But what's so funny is they put one thing out and they turn around and contradict themselves. Right. Just like they talk about all these Al-Qaeda terrorists, but when the supposed troops invaded Afghanistan and took over their embassy, they let 300 of them back as a gesture of good faith. And then they turn around and say that all these people are loose. They told me in the beginning they let 300 go back. So then they say that the FBI, the CIA, and the intelligence agencies had such a breakdown in communication that they weren't able to intercept all these messages got 911. And now they know everything that you're doing in the checkbook.
They could possibly.
They contradict themselves all the time.
Yeah.
They're trying to instill fear.
And the other thing is that there's a lot of fiction on the internet. There's a lot of fiction on the internet, and people are just writing creative stories about whatever is on their mind. A to Z, soup to nuts. What in the world are you monitoring? You got a lot of insane people on the internet. They're putting all kinds of garbage up there. How do you know that the person's crazy or not? You can't ascertain that by monitoring their internet records. You just can't monitor that.
That's like the guy they pulled up there, he said he put a message on the phone about some guy saying there's going to be a bomb in July 4th.
In Arabic.
He said he didn't have to have, and his phone got crossed with some ounces from we heard this guy coming, yeah, we're gonna do the thing on July 4th.
It happened.
Yeah.
Now, that's another thing. You know how many languages on the internet?
No.
You know, when you talk about the World Wide Web, I don't know about what your had, but the one that I had, it has up there, you have to specify, when you ask it for a word, you have to specify English only, or it'll give you that topic in every language, wherever it shows up, right? It'll convert it to every other language and still look for it. German, French, Spanish, whatever. And you can go on so long. So you have to specify even English only. How in the world? They cannot do it. The cat is out of the bag. The censorship of the media is over. That's why they're forced to tell more of the truth in their own newspapers, in their own magazines, in their own television and radio, because people are finding out the truth through that internet. So they're forced to tell things like that. And this is part of the downfall, because they cannot control the masses if the masses are finding out the truth on their own.
That's like when they had that fire alarm in the White House.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, everybody else except the Bush. They had to tell that because, because what you're saying.
Because the people who work in there on the internet, and they're out there, they're going to tell it. They can't stop those people from going home and getting on the internet and
It was embarrassing, but everybody was ushered out. They had guards take everybody out, except for Bush and his wife. They didn't even know that the people was outside on the lawn. They didn't know.
Yeah, but if it wasn't for the internet and this, we would never have known.
Right.
We wouldn't have known the lady got drunk, passed out, and up in the
And saw imaginary dogs.
I mean, it's ludicrous. Oh, by the way, he's having an operation. What day?
Colonoscopy.
Yeah.
Tomorrow. He's having an operation tomorrow. Was his son in cancer? What's the son?
Oh, the son, yes. Not his dad.
Jupiter is in cancer. And he's putting Cheney in charge while he's under the anesthetic.
The chain going to.
What about the
Chain going.
Speaker of the House?
What's his?
Who's supposed to be in charge now?
The Speaker of the House? What's his name? Dennis Hatcher?
I'm saying, the president goes down.
No, Dick
Cheney.
Cheney. The real
And then after him, Dennis Hatcher.
The real president.
Dennis Hatcher, H-A-S-T-E-R-T. He's the Speaker of the House. He would be next.
Right.
Right.
So that's what he was in charge. The change was nothing.
And he's sick.
Yeah.
He's sicker than Bush.
Oh, this should be one.
Oh, yeah. This is very dangerous time for the Republicans. All right. So that's the media, that's the court systems. And also, the other part here is that the financial system is in trouble. Every time you turn around, the interest rates are going down. Whenever the interest rates go down, that means that a lot of investors are losing money. Investors make a lot of money when the interest rates are up. That means profits are up. But when the interest rates are falling, the financial system is on the decline.
Constantly falling.
Constantly falling and rising. Okay? That means if you were to buy a United States savings bond, and if it was to pay 5% interest over 10 years, it means now it's not even paying that.
And they're pushing it. And they got a big push on the job.
They are the United States savings bonds, trading bonds.
You don't hear about Greenspan anymore, do you?
Oh no, he was big time all of them. Every time you turn around, he was out there, and I'm talking about him anymore. The financial system is on the decline, and everybody's running for cover.
We cut it 7 times in 1 year.
Yes, he sure did.
That's probably.
So, do you see it? The harder they fall. All of this is happening to them at the same time. And then, just as Don and I were discussing earlier today, the United States Republic is a cancer. Their sun sign Cancer. And Jupiter is in Cancer now, and Saturn is going to enter Cancer, I believe, the middle of next year. For 2.5 years, Saturn is going to be in Cancer. That's the aftermath. That's the paying the piper. You want to dance? Pay the piper. Huh?
Here's what it costs.
Here's what it costs. And now they've accepted, they've already danced the dance. The piper has already played the music. Now they've got to pay the price. And there's no taking it back. All right, so that's what's happening with their financial system. Now, huh?
The value of the dollar has dropped to all-time low.
Yes, it has. Now, number 8 is what I call the sunset. That's S-O-N. The sunset. Huh? Oh, yeah. See? It's going to be rough. It didn't get rough yet for the Cancer people. That's why you need Great Seal to protect you and advise you and everything. And it's very interesting because even I was talking with Jeremiah the other day, and he did call me at the last minute, and it was the last minute, and he knew that what he was doing was going to be disastrous. But because of his knowledge of the science, he said, I better call Glenn and ask about this before I make this move. And when he called me and I said, look, this is it, this is there, this is where it is, and this is a reality, and if you do this, this is going to be the result. This is not my prediction. I'm reading to you where the planetary bodies are and what they're going to do, what the aftermath will be, which is something he already knew. But what is happening is, and as I was explaining to him, and I don't want to say too much, but the planetary lineup is moving to where it's not going to be in his favor. Were he not aware of this planetary lineup, he would have made the move that I cautioned him not to make, and he took my advice, and everything is working out. But had he not taken my advice, then everything would have been a disaster. There's no question about that. So now, knowing what you know about astrologics gives you a very powerful tool that other people do not have. Nobody knows astrologics the way you do. And I told you that before. I said, you know more astrologics than the Pope. Remember? And I do the thing I said, he's got a breastplate that's square. Right? Actually, it's rectangular. When zodiac is round, you cannot fit a square peg into a round hole. Now, the sun sets. What do I mean? What is the evidence that the sun is setting? And when I say the sun, I'm talking mother and son. So now, the sun has been out there in charge. And I'm not doing this to bash the men, okay? The sun has been in charge. The paternal system has been the order of the day, the rule. Okay? Now the sun is setting. One of the indications, the strongest indication that the sun is setting is the downsizing of the corporation. And downsizing is a word they like to use to soften the blow when they're really firing people, laying them off, right? Getting rid of them. They're not getting their pensions. All kinds of things are happening to them. And it's not just downsizing and saying that downsizing implies that you're giving people severance pay. Downsizing implies that you're keeping them in their benefits package for a year or so. That you're giving them some cushion rather than just letting them go. Dumping them off. Downsizing implies that, but that's not what's happening to these people. They're being cut off. Right? And a lot of times with no notice, just like with that Dollar Land, they didn't even know that the place was going to close. People show up to work that day. American Appliance is another one. They show up to work that day, everything's all shut down. No notice whatsoever. Okay? That's the kind of downsizing that they're doing. It's a very dangerous sign. Bankruptcies are an all-time high. Bankruptcies are so frequent now that the courts are now very, very stringent about who they are accepting into bankruptcy anymore. It used to be all you had to do was fill out a paper and in you go.
Right.
Right? Now they're very, very strict. You better pay us our money. If you miss a payment, we might dismiss your case. That's how strict they are about these bankruptcies now. They're willing to let you go at the drop of a hat because they're so desperate for money themselves. And looking out for the creditors. This one is going to blow your mind a little bit. We were watching a movie the other day. What? Charlie, was this the movie Bad Company?
Bad Company.
And they said that in Prague, Czechoslovakia, a republic, that there was a cemetery with over 2 million people buried there. It's the largest. It's the largest cemetery for most of the cemetery. How in the world people are living?
Didn't you cry? Could be called that.
These are headstones. Over 2 million people buried there.
In Prague, a city.
Yeah.
Czechoslovakia.
Yeah. That's a lot of folks. The sun is setting, and here you go. Robbie, I would like you to share with the class your story about your cousin who passed away and is going to be cremated.
Oh, Brother Kelly?
Yeah.
We had, my cousin passed away about a week and a half ago.
Please stand up.
I'm sorry. Passed away about a week and a half ago. And she was baptized Catholic and a faithful parishioner to the church where her mother decided to have her final viewing. And everything was set up. Funeral arrangements were made, everybody knows what the process was going to be. When the priest found out that she had chosen to be cremated, they wouldn't allow her body in the church.
This was when the day of the
The
funeral.
day before the funeral.
The day before the funeral.
So, fortunately, the undertaker Paul didn't have anything else going on. So they had a usher at the church telling people to go around the corner to the funeral parlor to view the body. Then once the viewing was over, everyone went back around to the church for a memorial service for her.
And the body was at the funeral. And they were in the church having
Having a
service.
service. They would not allow her body in the church when they found out she wanted to be cremated.
Why would they not allow her body into the church if she was going to be cremated? They don't want to ascend. They do not want her soul to ascend. They do not want her spirit out there in the Elohim to ascend so it can cycle and grow and come back and ascend. Because they know that if she's embalmed and buried, they have her soul entombed. The body cannot decompose. And as long as that body cannot decompose, that spirit cannot fly. We cannot soar. So when we are empowered financially, and I promise you, we will be, one of our tasks through the Royal Chaplain's office will be to go back and claim our family. And this is our duty, posthumous. That's right. And give them a proper ascension ceremony.
Set them free.
Set their spirits free. If we do not, we are impeding our own family line. And it's our fault because we know and they didn't. And we have the power to set them free. You understand?
The punishment for that.
Right. And there are some of us whose family members have passed away so long ago that I'd say if it's been, I don't know, I'll do a calculation, but I'm willing to say that if it's been more than 30 or 40 years, the body has begun to decompose already. So once it begins its decomposition, the decomposition occurs fairly quickly. But the point is getting it to the point where it will start to decompose. Okay? And if we do not do that, what we're doing is allowing those beings to maintain the republic longer and longer. And this is how the republic has become so powerful in the first place, because you know that everything that occurs on the physical plane occurs on the spiritual plane first. So if they are cremating theirs, like they did with JFK Jr., cremated him at sea and spread his ashes. Okay? So if they're doing that for theirs, and then we're embalming and entombing ours, what do you think is happening on the physical plane? They're staying in power. And we gradually forget our science. We lose Islam because it cannot cycle back in our families. We cannot create dynasties because we've shut off our dynasties and we've entombed the science. You see that? And this story that she just shared with you is not a minor incident. It is of major proportion. Major proportion. Because it affects us here and now. It is why we are here and now in this place, impoverished, trying to raise a field that should never have been lost. And now that we know how to raise it, we know that this is how it was lost. It is incumbent upon us to go back and do this. So, and one of the things that nature puts in place is a sunrise and a sunset. So, what happens when the sun sets? Number 9.
Goes back to dormancy to return of the day.
Thank you. When the sun sets, the moon rises. And the moon is who? The mother. And so then when the sun sets, the mother awakens.
Number 9. Mother's a wolf.
That's right. The mother awakens. And more than that, as the sun sets, what does he do? He calls to the mother. I didn't want to write that one before I questioned you to get you to say that it was the moon. He calls to the mother. And I didn't know that this was going to show up in the paper today, as you know, and I had prepared this outline to do this lecture tonight. I didn't know that what was going to show up on the front page. Where's the paper? The newspaper. Right. I didn't know that this was going to show up where he's calling to the mother, but they gagged him.
Yes, they did.
But he's calling. He doesn't have to open his mouth like that. A picture's worth 1,000 words. This is telling the story. They put a gag on him. Why? So he can't actually call out to the Elohim. But they put a gag on him. But look, all these other little children, their mouths are not gagged. All the rest of them they have in here, they're not gagged. They can call to the mother. I didn't know that was going to be in there, and that's just pure evidence to me that, you know, what I'm saying is true.
That was yesterday's case.
That was yesterday's case.
And God said, Miss L, I think you need to read this. I said, what? I want to say, big boy got a gag by this. This morning, I said, why didn't you read that? And he said, I think you need to read this. They bring you all kinds, when they see a picture now, they bring you stuff over.
Oh,
and
yeah, I'm glad you brought it in.
Well, I want to say, pig boy got a gag, but I ain't say it. I'm looking at the picture and said, oh.
Right.
You know,
It tells the story that they're calling to the mother, and the mother must hear them. She must awaken when the call comes.
You try sleeping, and trust me, I know. When that baby wakes up in the middle of the night, her mama, baby, why the baby not waking up in the night and say, Dad?
Welcoming you from FEMA to building an effective cybersecurity awareness program with our speaker today, Silka Gonzalez, which I will be presenting in just a couple moments. So just to get started, I would like to talk a little bit about FIBA, the Florida International Bankers Association, and our programs that we have to offer. My name is Sofia Villalobos. I am the Institute Director, and I manage all of FIBA's educational programs. So just a little bit about what we've done in terms of cybersecurity. We offer a course called Cybersecurity for Financial Institutions that focuses on the regulatory cybersecurity laws, FFIEC, the Presidential Executive Order, and discover how to make sure that we are abiding by those regulations, to discover also the best detection tools, monitoring programs, and how to identify, prevent, and resolve cyber threats. So if you'd like more information about this program, you can find it on the website that is listed, fiba.net/cybersecurity, and also I am willing to answer any questions you may have. So moving along with our presentation today, I'm going to first talk a little bit about Silka Gonzalez, who is our speaker today. Thank you so much, Silka, for joining us. She is the founder and president of ERM Protect since 1998 when she started the company. She received bachelor's degrees in both computer information systems and accounting from Xavier University. She has also earned her master's degree in accounting information systems from Florida International University. Silka also completed an entrepreneurial master's program at MIT. She has more than 30 years of experience in the field of cybersecurity, and prior to founding ERM Protect, she worked as a manager of IT and business services at Price Waterhouse, and also served as a manager of information systems auditing and manager of information systems security from American Bankers Insurance Group. So a little information about ERM to help you understand her background and what ERM's mission is. They are a leading information security and training company that help businesses improve their cybersecurity posture and comply with regulations governing sensitive data. Services include information security strategy, cybersecurity assessments, remediation solutions, and digital forensics. The company has served more than 300 guests globally since its inception. The company recently launched a new product to address the human side of IT security vulnerabilities. These training modules teach employees how to identify when they are being targeted by hackers, turning them into human firewall against cyber attacks. The company's 60+ engaging training modules feature short animated chalkboard videos so that employees can stay tuned in and get back to work quickly. It's written by IT security experts in the field of battling hackers every day, and the content is authoritative, timely, and continuously updated. So now Silka is going to begin the presentation. Again, I welcome all of you, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me here today. Like Sofia said, I'm Silka Gonzalez, and I'm the president and founder of Enterprise Risk Management. I was invited here today to talk to you about how to develop a security awareness and training program. And I'm going to share some information that hopefully will help you in that process of developing a program, or if you're in the process of evaluating your existing program and updating or improving your program, hopefully this information will be useful to you. So let's start with the agenda of the things that I want to cover for you guys today. I want to talk first about the human factor or human error as it relates to security and security awareness training program. I also want to talk to you about different key aspects of a security awareness training program, including why is this important, why do we need a program, what are some of the benefits of having a program. I want to cover a little bit a framework of a series of structured steps or phases that organizations need to follow when they need to develop a security awareness program. And I want to share with you some best practices that we have learned over many years developing programs and reviewing and enhancing programs for many clients. I also want to talk to you guys about the frequency of testing, and provide some insight into what we think works to be effective. We also want to talk about different methods of training people that could be effective for organizations, and how to test the effectiveness of your program. And then I want to conclude with some tips that might be useful for you when you're developing the program. And I will wrap it up with, providing some information about free resources that are, extremely good that you can download and use to develop your program or to evaluate your existing program. And at the end, I will answer all the questions that you have. Hopefully, I can answer all the questions here during this webinar. If there's something that I can not answer today, or that you have some other questions later, I'll be available, and I'll provide my email and my phone, and you guys can contact me later. So let's start with the first section of the presentation. So let's talk about the human error. We know, and you guys know, that the number of incidents and breaches continue growing year after year. So when you look at the statistics of incidents and breaches, every year they seem to be worse. And, I don't think it's something that is going to improve in the near future. And, we have all kinds of agents that are, committing these incidents and breaches. So you have from hackers, you have employees, you have, activists, you have governments, and they have all kinds of different motivations why they go after organizations. Some of them have, monetary interests. Some of them are after intellectual property. Some of them are after a competitive advantage. And some of them, they might even have, desire to have revenge. And what we're seeing is that, all these different actors are going after the human element. And we're seeing that there's a significant increment in incidents and breaches that are happening through people that are related to organizations. Either they work internally in the organization, or they're connected somehow with the organization. So that's why we need to talk about the human error, because it's becoming a significant factor in terms of incidents and breaches for organizations. And you guys know that there's a significant number of attacks with phishing attacks of different types of malware and virus attacks, ransomware attacks. There's all kinds of situations where employees might make a common error or mistake because they're not aware of something. They might have a device that is stolen or is misplaced that has sensitive information about the organization. You might even have, employees internally that they don't have, that their agenda might be something that is not what you have in mind. Their agenda might be, stealing some of your information, and committing some fraud, or they want to take some intellectual property. So that's another issue. And you also may have a series of other users that are interacting with your entity, such as vendors or trading partners, that could be used as vectors to enter into an organization. So all these different factors make the human error very, very, very significant in terms of cybersecurity, and how we need to address protection for organizations has to consider the human element significantly if we want to fight this battle and ensure that we can help minimize the risk of an incident or a breach for our organizations. So let's talk now of why we think that this human error, what are some of the the potential causes that are creating that this human error is growing and becoming more significant all the time. So we know that technology keeps changing. There's new emerging technologies. There's more automation. There's more proliferation of devices, mobile devices, new technologies like cloud computer technology, Internet of Things. more and more systems are interconnected and organizations. And today, organizations cannot function with their users or their vendors or their trading partners or anybody in the world if they're not connected. So all this level of technical complexity increases the probability that you have different vectors that could be used as entry points into organizations to compromise the entity. The other factor that causes the human error to be more significant is, the third-party situation. Which, what I mean by this is that most organizations use many different kinds of third parties on a daily basis. Let's start with the composition of the employees of organizations. You have organizations today that have, their full-time employees, plus they might use some temporary employees or 1099s, and they might be using contractors, they might be using consultants. That's just from the, from the internal, from the employees only. But they also have, third-party vendors. For example, one of our clients is Florida Power & Light. We help them to perform security assessments for their third-party vendors. And they have probably more than 100,000 vendors nationwide. So all these are potential entry points if these vendors have connectivity inside the institution. So that's another issue related to the third parties. Also, organizations have a lot of trading partners that are also connecting to the organizations. And you also have your own customers that are potentially connecting electronically one or another to your institution and your systems. So all this increments the human error factor. Another consideration is social media. For some reason, human beings love to be connected, especially millennials. And they seem that they cannot be disconnected from their phones and their mobile devices. And social media is something that that is being used frequently and by all kinds of people, including your employees. The issue with this is it's another potential vector that could be used to impact your organization through your users. So they could be, navigating social media, and without knowing, they might be bringing, something inside your organization that could compromise the organization. Another factor that increases the human error is the threat landscape. And what I mean by that is, that there's a million ways an organization could be compromised and hacked. It's not just phishing. It's not just ransomware. There's all kinds of threats that could be used against an organization. Some of them are highly technical. Some of them are not technical at all. And so the threat landscaping, as technology is evolving, we have emerging technologies and we have more automation, is also changing. So we see different kinds of online scams, different kinds of online kind of frauds, and different kinds of social engineering schemes that are being used against organizations. The other thing that we see that is also increasing the human error is the lack of training. Even though in the last few years we see an increment in organizations trying to educate their users, many times, not all organizations are using training for their employees for cybersecurity. And even the ones that have some security training, especially, organizations that are highly regulated, like banks, they need to provide some level of security training. Their training might not be sufficient to educate their users about the different kinds of risks and threats that are out there, so that they can identify that that there's a threat and how to protect both themselves and their organization. So this inadequate level of training or complete or the lack of training is also creating that you have users that are not aware of the level of exposure and risk they have when they are interacting with systems and with information from your organization. So let's talk about why we think that security awareness and training programs are important. So the first thing is that for nowadays, any type of organization, in order for them to do their daily activities and function and transact, their most important asset is information. And if that information asset is not, protected properly, that could impact the organization. So security awareness trainings allow organizations to, protect that information asset of their organization. The second factor why security awareness training programs are important is because, people are the weakest link when you're thinking about an organization. The easiest way an organization can be breached is through their people. Or some people that have connectivity with the entities, direct employees or other, users, like I mentioned before. And there's, statistics that a large percentage of attacks that are occurring are due to human error. So by using adequate security awareness and training programs, you can educate the users to be better prepared to deal with the different kinds of threats and risks that are out there. The other reason why security awareness training programs are important is because, there's an increase in laws, regulations, and standards related to cybersecurity. And when we're thinking about, laws and regulations, we need to consider laws and regulations at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level, and at the international level. Laws that have to do with security or privacy or both, and standards that might be impacting your organization that are related to security, and it must, in some cases, it's a required standard. Like, for example, if you're processing credit cards, you will have to comply with the PCI data security standards. Or if you're dealing with certain agencies of the federal government, you will be required to implement the niche standards. So these are things that could be addressed by security awareness training programs properly. Another reason why the programs are important is because organizations have their own internal policies and procedures and standards of what is acceptable behavior and what is not acceptable behavior. And the security awareness training programs is the perfect tool that can be used to communicate the policies, the procedures, and the standards, and ensure that they can be they can enforce those policies and procedures and standards. And finally, you can use the security awareness training programs to provide information to the users about what are the consequences of when organizations have incidents and breaches, consequences like business disruptions, additional costs, reputational damage, like losing customers and losing profitability, lawsuits. And it can even include some employees being affected by losing their jobs when there are breach incidents and breaches. So security awareness training programs can be used for all these different things that I mentioned here. Okay, so let's talk about some of the benefits of having a sound security awareness and training program. If you develop a good program, the probability of reducing incidents and breaches increases. And so organizations today, with the high probability that they will experience incidents and breaches one or many times, if you can use something to reduce that, that will be absolutely something that will be beneficial for the organization. So that's one benefit that the security awareness and training program will bring. The other thing is that by using the programs, you can really empower the users to take personal responsibility. You can also use the programs, like I mentioned before, to address all the local, state, federal, and international laws and regulations that your organization has to comply with. And you can make sure that you are addressing that at the right level through the program. The other thing is, like I mentioned before, you can use the program to communicate and enforce internal policies, procedures, and standards. And you can use the program also to improve the internal control level inside the organization, improve the level of participation of the users, including top management and the board of directors. You can also use this to improve the overall culture of the company, and you can use these programs to save costs and improve staff confidence. So there's a lot of benefits that come with having a good and sound security awareness and training program. Okay, so now let's talk about a basic framework for organizations that need to develop and maintain a security awareness and training program. By the way, every organization should develop a security awareness and training program of some type. Obviously, it's going to depend, the magnitude of the program. It's going to depend on the size and complexity of your entity. It's also going to depend on in the industry. It's going to depend also on the type of organization that you have and the type of data that you have and the type of risk and that you have in your organization. But I want to talk about a same sample framework that we can all use, even though you might add some other steps or phases. These are some basic components that you need to address if you really, really want to develop a good program that is going to be effective. The first phase is that you need to determine the current state. You need to determine the current state of the security posture of your organization, and you need to determine the current state of security awareness inside your organization. If you cannot understand this at a deep level, you can never develop a good security awareness and training program. So this step is very, very, very critical. So it's a step where you're going to do a deep analysis of where is my organization in terms of security and security awareness level. So some of the techniques that are used to obtain this information is, performing interviews throughout an organization to get an understanding of their security posture and security awareness level. You can also use surveys where you are going to use the entire demographic of the organization, including employees. And if you are going to consider your program for other audiences like customers also, then you need to do the surveys for all the audiences that you're planning to educate. And so when you prepare and use the surveys, your intention is to identify how much they know about security and where are the areas where they have weaknesses. You want to identify different kinds of cybersecurity threats and areas that can create problems for the organization. And you want to know exactly how much the users in the organization know about these things or not. Because by using the result of the survey, then you can tailor the training programs based on the areas where your users are having deficiencies. Another thing that should be done during this phase is to do a study of, what is happening in terms of security and security threat landscape in your industry and in organizations similar to yours. Because that's also going to indicate if there's specific things that are happening in your industry and organizations similar to you that you need to take in consideration when you're developing your plan. Another thing that should be done during this phase is to review the existing security training material that you have at your organization so that you can determine if the material is as good or is incomplete or needs some improvement. Another thing that is crucial during this stage is that you need to analyze, any potential, local, state, federal, and international law related to security, information security, and privacy that you need to make sure that you address properly within your program, as well as any security standard that your organization has to comply with. It's also important to see if your organization have performed different kinds of cybersecurity assessments, like a comprehensive security assessment or any type of ethical hacking, either for an external pen testing, internal pen testing, a web application, or if they have performed a third-party vendor security assessment, if they have performed phishing simulations or other types of social engineering testing, or they've done a data leakage review, or a physical security assessment, any kind of cybersecurity assessment that has been performed within the organization, it will make sense to review what are the results of those assessments and what are the kinds of weaknesses and risk that the organization have that is exposing the organization, so that you can make sure that you use that information to create material of training that help to educate and address those areas where you have potential issues. Also, if the organization have a security, function that is more advanced, you want to understand, what is that security function? What is the composition of the function? Who are the members of the security function and the security awareness team? And you want to understand what are the security matrix that you're using, and analyzing if the function and the people and the roles and the matrix, if they seem to be adequate or not, or if they need adjustment. Another area to review during this stage is to look into the history of incidents within your own business or breaches that you have previously in the past, and identify why the incident happened, why the breach happened, and use that information to make sure you're addressing those issues in the training programs. Also, if there's, you can take that further and do review within the industry of the kinds of incidents and breaches that seem to be, very typical of your industry. So you can make sure that, you plan to incorporate in your trainings, the kind of, material that is relevant to your industry that is creating potential incidents for your peers. So these are some of the things that that need to be done during this phase. The better you analyze different aspects during this phase and understand what is the security posture and what is the security awareness level of my institution, the better you're going to be able to prepare a sound program for your organization. The next step, in the framework is to develop the program. Okay, so when you develop the program, there are key things that you need to address, and that is the who, the what, the how, and the why. And what I mean by that is you need to determine, before you go and start writing and doing things, you need to determine who is the audience that I'm going to cover with this security awareness training program. Because the audience could be all full-time employees, or it could be employees in just a geographical area, or it could be, full-time employees plus, part-time employees plus consultants plus contractors. It could also include third-party vendors. It could include their, trading partners. It could include customers. So your program, before you start building the program, you need to have your target audience very, very, very clear. Who are you going to train? And so, because your training, it has to be tailored to in accordance to the audiences that you're going to be including in your program. The second thing that you need to determine to develop the program is the what. And the what is what content of training and what areas and topics I want to cover for my audiences and in my training. And so you need to be very careful so that the content that you include is the most critical and effective content to educate your users. The third thing that you need to determine is the how. The how is to determine what kinds of methods of training do I want to use for my program. Am I going to use live presentations? Am I going to use webinars? Am I going to use a newsletter? Am I going to use a launch and learning session or videos? Whatever you decide that you are going to include in your program, you need to determine what methods and how many, and what is the benefits of those methods. What's the cost of the methods that you're trying to use? What are the methods that are more useful depending on the type of audience that you're trying to educate? And the last thing that you need to determine is the why. The why is, to determine how am I going to evaluate the success factor of this program, and what are going to be the metrics that I want to use to make sure that I can measure the program effectiveness. The next phase in the framework is to implement the program. And this is where you actually have developed an implementation work plan, and you deploy that plan. So you are implementing the program itself. The next step is maintaining the program, because this you need to think about this like this is not a one-time deal that you handle once and you forget about this. This is a life cycle and process that is ongoing. So the next step is to maintain the program, and to maintain the program you need to review and update the program periodically. Some organizations do it once a year, some organizations do it every quarter or twice a year, and some organizations also do it when they have major changes. For example, if you go and acquire another business, there's a merge and acquisition, and that's a major change that will require changes into the security awareness training program. Or if there's new laws or new regulations or new standards that you need to comply with, that also requires updates to the program. If there's different types of threats and different risk components, something that is critical, then those things need to be addressed and your plan has to be updated. But typically, as a minimum, organizations should be looking at their programs to review them and update them at least once a year. And the last step of the framework is to measure performance. And what I mean by that is, you need to regularly measure what is working, what is not working, and what kind of adjustments you need to make to the program, because you don't want to put things in place that are not being effective and that you're not changing the behavior of the users, or you're not addressing the things that you need to address properly. So measuring the performance is absolutely critical so that you can determine how to tweak your program and make it better. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some best practices if you want an effective, and sound program for your organization. I think one of the most important things, if not the most important thing that you need for a program to be successful, is that you need executive management support. You need executive management to be the sponsor and that they will support your program, on an ongoing basis. They are the ones that are going to have to allocate the budget and the resources to make sure that the program can be implemented and that it could be successful. So that is crucial. Another thing is, having a clear scope definition for the program. You need to define who are you going to cover in the program. Are you going to cover employees? Are you going to cover also contractors? Are you going to cover vendors or trading partners or customers? Obviously, the more people you cover, the more expansive and more expensive and more difficult it is if you want to do it properly, because you're talking about different audiences with different kinds of cybersecurity risks and different approaches of how you're going to be educating them. But it's very, very crucial that, if you want to be effective, you have to define the right scope. And if you decide that you want to incrementally add more different groups into the program, you can do that and do it in phases. The other thing that is important is that you have to define clear goals and objectives, benefits and expectations of the program. Because this is the only way you're going to be able to go back and measure against those goals and those objectives and your expectations and see if you're meeting them or not. The other thing that is very critical is, the organizational structure. You have to determine within your institution who's going to be responsible for the security awareness training program. Is it going to be a security manager that is reporting to the CISO? Is it going to be the CISO? Who's going to be responsible? And are you going to have also a security committee that has representation from different parts of the business that is also going to participate in the security awareness training program, in the development and in the review and updates? You need to, determine what is the role that the board of director members are going to have in terms of this security awareness training program. You're also going to have to determine, how you're going to handle this program. Is this going to be a centralized program, or is this going to be, a semi-decentralized program or completely decentralized program? That's a decision that you have to make. You also need to make a decision in terms of, is this a program that we're going to develop totally internally, or are we going to outsource this, or are we going to co-source, or at least we determine that certain things we're going to get from outside, and some of the aspects we're going to handle inside. These are all kinds of decisions that are important if you want to make sure that your program is going to be sound and effective. The other thing that is going to be critical is defining clear roles and responsibilities for all the members that one way or another are going to be participating in the comprehensive security awareness program. Other best practices, include using a multidisciplinary approach. This one is crucial. If you don't use this one, the security awareness program will never, ever be effective. Because most people think that IT security and security awareness is a security responsibility, an issue, and it's not. This is a company-wide, enterprise-wide issue and problem. So if we want to build a good and sound program, we need to have people that represent the entire organization from different areas. You will have IT security, but you also will have people from compliance, you have people from risk management, from privacy, from the legal department, from audit. You might have people from research and development, people that are developing systems. You have people that are in marketing and sales. You need to have people that represent the different areas of the business. Why? Because every area of the business will have risks and threats related to cybersecurity that if you don't identify and address that individually, you cannot train properly on cybersecurity awareness that is effective. So that's why the multidisciplinary approach is so critical. Because if we generate, trainings that are just generic trainings about passwords and about generic things, yes, that will give some knowledge to the users that will be useful across the board for all departments. But if you really want to contain the problems of incidents and breaches, you're going to have to go all the way down to specific functions within their organization to make sure you're addressing different risks that are present in different areas of the business. The other thing is, laws, regulations, and standards. If you want your program to be really good, you need to make sure that you're always, ensuring that you're addressing all the potential laws and regulations that are applicable to your business, the local, state, federal, and international level. The same thing with standards. And the same thing, you need to understand all the internal policies and procedures of the business and make sure that they're properly addressed within the training programs. It is also crucial that you customize your training to your organization. Each organization is unique, so having a generic security program that is the same for all organizations is not going to be effective. You can use certain aspects that are more generic, but you need to make the program more tailored to your organization, to your brand, to your culture, to the size and complexity of your entity, to the type of risk that you have, to the type of operations and transactions that you have, and the types of relationships that you have with other entities that might be impacting your own entity. So that's going to be important, the customization. The other thing that is a best practice is to have a narrow focus. What I mean by this is, you need to be smart about how you're going to be training and what are you going to be covering. So you want to make sure that you're addressing the most critical aspects, the greatest areas of risk, where you have the weakest links within the organization, and that you're going to be selective in terms of the topics, the themes, and the areas that you want to cover. Because you could be training forever about all kinds of things. You want to make sure that what you're training is absolutely relevant and related to your organizations and the functions within your organization. And the last thing that I have here is, real life, connect. What I mean by that is, when you're developing your program, you need to use situations and examples that are relevant to your industry and your organization. So make sure that you're using a specific, that you're covering your specific laws, standards, specific functional areas, specific groups within your entity, and specific audiences. And some other best practices include, the fact that when you're developing the content, or make sure the content is about the users, you need to make sure that the content is personal, that they feel that the information that you're providing them is not just about the company itself, but it's also, how do I protect the employee? How do I protect the employee information and knowledge that it helps them to protect them inside the job, but also outside the job, knowledge that they can use with their own families. When you make something personal, people pay attention. That's why this will be important. Practice. This one is a crucial one, because you need to make sure that, no matter how good the program is in terms of providing training, if you provide training that is just, theory and concepts, that's one thing. But the other thing is, testing how well users behave, using more intrusive testing of different kinds to make sure that you really can evaluate what is the real posture of the security of the company, what is the level of knowledge of the users, so that they don't expose your organization to an incident or a breach. And, you need to be, a lot of organizations are using automated simulations for phishing, and that is fine. But you need to be very, very careful with this, because, for a couple of reasons. Phishing attacks are only one of thousands of possible attacks an organization can have. So if you only use phishing simulations, you're missing a lot of the potential other areas that could be used to breach your organization. So I recommend that you expand your scope of testing to many other areas besides phishing simulations that are automated. And the other reason that I think you need to consider further testing than that is that those phishing tools that are automated use specific fixed templates that are looking for potential kinds of phishing scenarios that can basically, they're not flexible, and the users will learn to identify that kind of threat and reprogram them for specific kinds of phishing attempts. But the reality is, that attackers are very creative, malicious, and they're going to use every possible thing they can. So if you only use few ways of testing your users, you might not know how well prepared they are to protect your business. So I recommend that the testing need to be thorough and needs to include many different kinds of tests. The other thing is that the programs have to have ways of measuring what's working, what is not working, and provide metrics, and that you need to be able to evaluate the program on an ongoing basis to determine what works and what doesn't work, and make improvements into the program. The other things for best practices is that your program needs to have flexibility, so that you'll be able to tailor the training to specific audiences and groups within your organization, because the way you train, for example, board of director members is not the same way that you train programmers that are developing web applications, and that they need to put proper security inside the web applications. And it's not the same way that you train a clerk at a bank, and it's not the same way that you talk to an accountant or someone that works in the wire transfers department. So you have to make sure that your training is flexible enough and tailored to your different groups and your different types of audiences and the type of risk that are relevant to them. The other thing is consider using incentives. People need to be engaged. It has to be compelling. So a lot of organizations, in order to get that level of encourage the employees to participate, they use things like the use of games and the use of awards as part of their program to make sure that it's compelling for their users. The other thing is that your program has to ensure it includes reinforcement. You need to think like when you were a little kid and your parents were teaching you not only one day a year or once a quarter. Your parents were teaching you all the time, and they were giving you reinforcement of do this, don't do that, and they will tell you quickly at the moment. They will tell you, for instance, if you're going to cross the street, look both sides, make sure their car is not coming so that it won't hit you. Just the minimum amount of information, and they will reinforce that information over and over again. Do the same thing with your training. Make sure that they're short, they're engaging, they're effective, use different methods, and it has to be ongoing. It cannot be one time a year or 2 times a year. It's all the time, and you cannot train always about the same topics. Passwords and phishing is not the only thing that expose an organization. If you have a marketing or communication group within your business, make sure that they help you draft the clear message that you need to take to your users in your organization. Okay, in terms of frequency of testing, I am a believer that the training has to be ongoing, like I mentioned before, all the time. Short, simple, engaging, using different kinds of methods of teaching, having open lines of communications with the users, and a security function that is dealing with awareness so that you can educate them. But also key points that you need to ensure that you have training is when you're onboarding new employees and you're giving them basic security information, and you're giving them also a specific security considerations that are critical to your industry and your business. And you're telling them about specific laws and regulations and standards that are applicable to your business and to their jobs. And you're talking to them about the specific internal policies and procedures and standards of the company that they need to understand and they need to comply with. And you need to make sure that that training that you're giving them, is tailored to your organization and your culture. And the other key point where training is highly recommended is after, testing of your security, or after, training groups within your organization and they fail in certain areas, or after you have an incident or a breach. This is the perfect time of finding out what went wrong, what went right, debriefing what are the lessons learned, and and determine what you need to do in terms of improving the training to make sure these situations don't happen in the future. Okay, in terms of methods of training, there are all kinds of methods that you can consider using for your program. I mean, organizations use live presentations, webinars, they use workshops, they use websites, they use blogs, newsletters, tips, alerts, they use security campaigns, they use security simulations, they use printed materials like posters, like screensavers, mouse pads. They can use games, especially for millennials, or special events like lunch and learn sessions or a table talk exercise. They're also using, products that they're buying that are providing them already with content and material and different methods of training. And they're also, they're using like videos, different types of videos and lectures. Some organizations are using, newer technology, emerging technologies like voice technology, like interactive learning technology, like virtual reality technology, including artificial intelligence. So what you need to include in your program, it depends on the size and complexity of your entity. It depends on the budget of your entity. It depends on the culture of your entity. And, the key is to figure out what things you want to include, that are effective, and accommodate that to the budget that you have. And you need to make it, not generic. You need to make it very unique and tailored to your business, your culture, your branding, and your different audiences. In terms of testing the effectiveness of the program, a lot of organizations are using a lot of simulated phishing automated tools to test effectiveness of the users. But again, like I mentioned before, a phishing attack is only one threat that can impact an organization, but there could be thousands of threats that an organizations and their users could be exposed to. And only testing for phishing, it could be misleading, and you might be missing a big part of the picture. So my recommendation is that you use extensive testing to look to test effectiveness of the security posture and the security awareness of your users to protect your entity. So to use all kinds of social engineering tests, go way beyond the regular phishing. To use also very customized phishing to the kind of industry and situations that you have, that it's unique and malicious, that really can test what's going on in your entity. To use hacking exercises of different types, to use phishing attacks, to use testing to cover aspects like malware, ransomware, data leakage, impersonation, to test for physical attacks, to test for social media attacks, to test for electronic front-transfer diversion, and to consider using also observation techniques to identify proper and inadequate behavior that needs to be corrected of the employees. These are different kinds of testing, and the more robust the testing, the better the program and the better the protection for the entity. People need to understand that in order to protect entities, you need multiple things. You need, you need the training for the human error, but you need also the assessments. You need also, the implementation of security and the maintenance of security. So it's a process of using different components to have good protection. That providing the training and the theory is one side, but it has to be combined with other aspects of cybersecurity, like good testing, to really make sure that you figure out what's wrong, and use the results of the testing to create new material for the training that will help you to protect your entity much better. So some tips for a successful program. Definitely you need to make the training interesting, engaging, and fun. If people don't make it personal and they don't think that there's anything there for them to learn something that is going to protect them personally and even their families, and how they can protect themselves in the job and protect their information, it's not going to be as effective. The other tip is, if you're going to train in small groups and train by audiences. So if you're going to train board of directors, train them. Or if you're going to train programmers, train them. If you're going to train clerks, train them. But if you mix all of them, the type of training that you'll be able to provide is only generic high-level training, which is not going to address all the risk areas that are significant to the business in each area of the business. Also, make sure that the sessions are short and that they're engaging, and that you're covering the most important information only. People are overwhelmed with information nowadays, so the short is better. Think about less is more, okay? And, the other thing is to focus on critical topics. Identify what is critical for the business, what is high risk, what are considered the weakest links within the business, what are the key topics and themes, and concentrate on those. And tailor the trainings to the audience. Also make sure your material is being updated regularly to include new threats, new trends, new technologies, critical topics, new laws and regulations and standards, or any changes that happen in the business. Also, make sure that you're training on a regular basis and you're reinforcing the training. So some of the things that can be done is that you can use dripping campaigns to reinforce knowledge for the users. And you can also use testing, like I mentioned before, to reinforce the knowledge. Make sure that you include methods of teaching that allow the users to be active participants and that they could be engaged. And ultimately, you want to train all users that could impact your business. You might have to start with, a limited number of users, like let's say, full-time employees. But eventually, you want to make sure that you're addressing all the users that could impact your business or your organization. And the last, section that I have here is that I wanted to share with you some resources that you can use if you are developing your program or updating or reviewing your program. There's some resources that are free that you can get. Some other ones are paid, but I'm going to share them with you. I included the NIST Standards Special Publication 850, which is Building an Information Technology Security Awareness and Training Program. It's free. Go to www.nist.gov. There's also the International Standard Organization, ISO. There's a couple of publications there, ISO 27002, 2013, and also ISO 27001, 2013. These are, good publications that can help you with your programs. Also, ISACA has COVID-5 Appendix F2 that is also useful. You can also use the PCI security standards that could be, provide a lot of insight. And you can, if you're a member of Gartner, you can use the materials from Gartner that are useful to develop a program. You can also go to our website, www.ERMProtect, and get a free guide, which is a basic template of a security awareness training program. It's just a template, but at least cover all the key areas that you need to address. And using that template, then you need to do all the heavy lifting analysis that I indicated to you. And then you need to customize that program to your entity. But at least you can get the template for free. It's in our website, www.ermprotect.com. And in the website, you can also find our new ERM Protect Security Awareness Training Product Solutions, which has a significant library of content of, I think, 60 to 100 different topics of cybersecurity that are educational in nature to educate users. We offer it through a SaaS cloud platform, and we also offer it individually where we sell the content, and the content is provided in different methods of training, like lecture videos, other type of short videos with stories, games, and interactive learning, voice technology. So all that is in our website that you can use our resources. And if you have any question, I'll be available, for your questions. And if you have questions later, or you're dealing with your program and have questions at a later time or need assistance, I'll be more than happy to take a call.
Good morning and welcome to our board meeting today. We have one topic, but there is a number of questions embedded within the one topic. And the topic is distinguishing liabilities from equity, including convertible debt. So I'll turn over to the staff to begin the discussion.
All right, thanks, Russ. So today's meeting is going to be a decision-making board meeting. The board will continue with redeliberations of its proposed update on distinguishing liabilities from equity. In December, the board discussed comment letter feedback on its proposal and affirmed some decisions. The decisions affirmed were to account for convertible instruments as a single unit of account, except for in circumstances when the conversion features are required to be bifurcated as a derivative, to remove an entity's ability to overcome the presumption about share settlement when calculating diluted EPS for a contract that may be settled in cash or shares, and to remove 3 of the settlement criteria that were included in subtopic E1540. So today the board will redeliberate all remaining amendments that were in the proposed update. If the board is able to make decisions on these items, then the board will also discuss transition and effective date. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Lucy, who's going to kick us off on convertible instruments.
Thank you, Mary. So as Mary mentioned before, at December 11th meeting, we already made decision on the single unit account model for convertible instrument. So at today's meeting, the staff would like the board to make decisions or discuss 4 remaining issues for convertible instruments. So I will tee up the first 2 issues together and ask the board to make a decision. And after that, I will tee up issue 3 and 4 that are the amendments in the proposed update and ask the board to redeliberate on it. So issue 1 is related to the interest income that may be recognized for the convertible debt instruments with substantial premiums. Some common letter respondents raised a potential scenario in which an entity might recognize net interest income under the single unit of account model when a convertible debt instrument is issued at or remeasured with substantial premiums. We ask the board to provide an exceptional accounting treatment to prohibit the recognition of interest income. To understand the pervasiveness of this issue, the staff analyzed the convertible debt instruments held by the public companies in 1998, which is the year before the beneficial conversion models was applied, and also in 2019, and noticed that the occurrence of convertible debt instruments with substantial premiums is not historically or currently prevalent in the U.S. market. Therefore, the staff does not expect that switching back to the single unit of account model would significantly increase the issuance of the convertible debt instruments with substantial premium. The staff also thinks that the pricing of the convertible instrument at issuance are more driven by the economic factors rather than accounting treatments. Furthermore, the disclosure amendments in the proposed update would require that an entity disclose the interest amount disaggregated by the coupon rate and amortization of the premium, discount, and issuance cost. Therefore, even if an entity recognizes a negative interest expense for convertible debt instruments, this explicit disclosure requirement would make such information transparent to the financial statement users. The staff thinks that this disclosure requirement provides a sufficient and a cost-beneficial solutions compared to the exceptional accounting treatment. Therefore, the staff recommends the board not further considering providing an exceptional accounting treatment to address this issue at this point. So now I move on to issue 2. Issue 2 is related to disclosure of current non-convertible borrowing rate. Some common letter respondents expressed concerns that for convertible debt instrument that may be or is required to be cash settled, the information about the non-convertible borrowing rate at the issuance date would be lost in moving to a single unit of account model. A few users further expressed that besides this rate at issuance date, they are also interested in a disclosure about the entity's current non-convertible borrowing rate for each reporting period. It means the rate has to be updated for each reporting period for them to get a reference point for comparison among different entities or for certain ratio and refinancing considerations. The staff noted that the requested disclosure about current non-convertible borrowing rate does not fit into any general types of information that is suggested by the disclosure framework. It would also be unnecessarily costly for preparers to provide such information at each reporting period because this information is readily available in the marketplace or relatively easy for users to obtain. Therefore, the staff recommends that the board not further consider requiring this disclosure. Furthermore, the staff thinks that compared with this rate, the fair value information of convertible debt instruments, which is required under the proposed update, is a more relevant and comprehensive alternative measure that would be useful in assessing an entity's cash flow prospects. With that, I turn it over to the board to discuss question number 1 and 2 in the handout.
Thanks, Lucy. I'd like to compliment you on your research and data that you had done for issue 1, and it gets me comfortable supporting the recommendation. But any other questions, Jim, on issue 1?
So I agree. Great job on issue 1. I do wonder if maybe we could put in the basis that we would monitor the development, because the issue of generating interest income from convertibles isn't just a function of interest rates in the environment. I mean, it could be more prevalent with lower, or certainly with negative rates, but it's really buying down the rate with the option value such that it takes a positive rate to a negative rate. That phenomena, as you point out, didn't happen prior to the BCF model with any significance, isn't happening currently. There's one example, I think, that you found is not due to the substantial premium, but it is due to the value in the option. And since it's not prevalent, I don't think we need a specialized accounting model. If it becomes prevalent, we could see whether or not the disclosures are sufficient. And I agreed completely on the second issue. First of all, I don't even know what rate would be called for if we said sort of the non-convertible or borrowing rate. Would it be the hypothetical rate on that instrument, or would it be the entity's borrowing rate, and then what borrowing rate? The collateralized rate, what term? Would it be, if the convertible was at a subsidiary, would it be the parent's rate, the sub's rate? Just a lot of questions I think we'd have to answer, and so I thought great job of analyzing it.
Al?
I agreed with everything Jim said except for putting it in the basis. I'm a little concerned about putting action steps in a basis, and there's probably a better way to do that. I don't know what the staff thinks or the chair, but I'm a little concerned about putting action steps.
I think we've done it in other projects, but
and I think it's created problems in the past. So because we look back and go, we didn't do that, or
we can. I think if we're committed, which we have been in the past, and I suspect we'll be in the future, to always monitor our conclusions that we put out, and this is just one aspect of that. So it's kind of part of, and we can talk and emphasize how we're going to do that once this statement goes out.
I agree with that. It's just part of our normal process.
Christine?
So I also wanted to compliment the staff on their use of data in issue 1. I thought that was excellent. And another reason why I got comfortable with the staff's position on issue 1 was because of the proposed amendment to require instrument-specific fair value. Because if you are issuing, or if the entity does issue an instrument that is deep in the money, that's going to show up in the fair value, and that's going to be another signal. And the fair value is a more comprehensive way of capturing that dilutive effect. So I think there's plenty of information out there for users to make the appropriate adjustments. With respect to issue 2, I also agree with staff's recommendation on that one. I had a slightly different perspective, although I do agree with the staff's analysis that it doesn't meet any of our concepts in the disclosure framework. I also felt that it was inconsistent with the objective of financial reporting. To value an entity, you've got users who are trying to make forecast future cash flows and discount rates, and we say explicitly that we're not expecting financial statements to provide that information directly, that they need to use whatever resources and the information in the financial statements to help them make those assessments, but we're not going to provide those assessments. And so I viewed providing this cost of debt on an ongoing basis is actually going against the framework. So for the staff's reasons and for my own reasons, I agree with the staff recommendation.
Aaron?
On question 1, I agree with the conclusions. I think, very few companies would want to issue securities that would have negative interest income. It just seems to me that, the disclosures would provide the information for that. And I think most companies, if they did run into this situation, would probably pro forma it out of the income statement. On question 2, the incremental borrowing cost, clearly this is something more relevant to a fixed income investor than it would be for an equity investor. But in the outreach, many people told us I could easily get this from my FactSet or Bloomberg screen. So I don't think it's really that important.
Anything else? Okay, so I'll call a vote on question 1 and then on question 2. The staff's recommending that we not provide guidance about negative interest expense in this project. Who agrees with that? That's 7. With respect to issue 2, the staff is recommending that we not add a requirement that any disclose the current non-convertible borrowing rate for convertible debt instruments. Who agrees with that? That's 7. Okay. Back to you, Lucy.
Okay, so now we're moving on to the last 2 issues. So issue 3 is related to the disclosure amendments in the proposed update. Common letter respondents generally agreed that the proposed disclosure amendments listed in paragraph 6 of the handout provide decision useful information. According to the feedback received, the staff further analyzed the comments on 3 disclosure items. The first one is the disclosure about events or conditions that occur during the reporting period that significantly affect the conversion conditions. 2 common letter respondents stated that this disclosure could lead to forward-looking or confidential information being disclosed to certain outside parties. The staff thinks that this proposed disclosure focuses on those events or changes in circumstances that have already occurred during the current reporting period. It is factual information, not for future-oriented information. The staff also acknowledged that disclosing some confidential information, such as change of control or business combination in the process of negotiation, may subject an entity to certain legal harm. In these cases, the staff thinks that it involves management's judgments according to the phase of the negotiation or other factors to decide whether the information about those events should be disclosed and how much details should be provided. The proposed disclosure does not obligate management to provide all detailed information, especially the confidential information that would cause legal harm to the entity. The staff also considered some comments on clarification of certain terms in this proposed disclosure and concluded that no clarification is needed because those terms either are well understood or widely used or may no longer be included in the final guidance. The second item is related to the disclosure about fair value information at instrument level. 3 common letter respondents stated that such disclosure would be burdensome for preparers and its benefit does not justify the cost. According to users' feedback and considering the complexity and different nature and terms of convertible instruments, the staff thinks that this disclosure is supported by the disclosure framework and would provide more direct and relevant information for users. The staff also understands that the valuation of convertible instrument usually is done at the individual instrument level. Therefore, an entity will not incur any additional costs to get this information. In addition, the carrying amount of convertible instrument usually is disclosed at the instrument level. Therefore, adding the fair value information for each instrument would not cause significant burdens. The staff also noted that in practice for public companies that have multiple convertible debt instruments outstanding at the end of a reporting period, many already disclose the fair value information at instrument level. The third item is about the disclosure frequency. Common letter respondents have mixed views. Some state that the disclosure should be required for every annual period and only required in interim periods for certain types of information or to the extent that there are some changes in facts and circumstances or accounting conclusions. While some said that the disclosures should be required for every annual and interim period. The staff noted that the language of as of each date for which a statement of financial position is presented or for each period for which a statement of financial performance is presented is included in the current disclosure requirements on the accounting effect of convertible instruments, and the public companies usually disclose such information for both interim and annual periods. The staff acknowledged that there may be different interpretations on what period this language refers to. However, noting that similar language has been used in various topics, the staff thinks that it is better not to make any further amendments under this project to the language in subtopic 470-20 until a more comprehensive consideration is done under the interim reporting project. So except for the disclosure items listed above, the staff noticed that the remaining disclosure items commented on by the respondents for clarification or addition are either not considered necessary or out of the project scope. Overall, the staff noted that there is a lack of pervasiveness in the issues raised by common letter respondents related to disclosure in the proposed update. Therefore, the staff recommends that the board affirm its decision on the disclosure amendments in the proposed update as listed in paragraph 6 of the handout. Issue 4 is related to other amendments in the proposed update. During initial deliberations, the board also decided to make certain amendments as listed in paragraph 7 of the handout to improve the guidance on convertible instruments. Noting that common letter respondents did not provide any substantial reasons or new information that would cause the board to reconsider its decision, the staff recommends that the board affirm its decision on those amendments. Now I turn it over to the board to discuss the last two questions on convertibles.
Okay, let's first focus on the disclosures in issue 3. Let's focus on what we want the content to be, and then we can talk about the timing. I've got questions on the timing, but does anybody have any concerns about the content, which would be 3A, B, C, D, and E, and then we'll talk about interim versus annual. Jim?
Can't figure out the new system.
It's all right. The green light. You need the green light.
Just an observation on 3B, which is the information about events or conditions that occur during the period that significantly affect the conversion provisions. And in our small group meeting, I had raised the issue, and I wonder if some of the people that were concerned about this thought that it was a disclosure of every potential event or condition that increased likelihood. So, for example, the conversion price changes upon a change of control. A change of control hasn't happened, but I've hired an investment bank to go shop me. And I think what you said is we're not saying that you have to disclose the fact that you hired an investment bank. It's really you would have to disclose if the change of control had occurred. It's the factual information. Even though hiring a investment bank is also factual, you're not making probability assessments about the likelihood and then disclosing that information. So I wondered if that helped people to understand, if we made clearer, we're not asking you to make predictions about likelihood. It's literally those circumstances that have changed the conversion condition. And that was the only thing I had on the package.
The individual versus aggregate in 3E, your recommendation is based on you'd have to do the individual calculation to compute the aggregate, so there's no incremental cost other than a display cost. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, and also because the company already disclosed the carrying amount of convertible debt at instrument level, even with the
so the display cost is
it's not that significant.
All right, great. Okay, so let me first ask who agrees to affirm our decisions regarding 3A through E, and then we'll talk about which of these we want to require an interim versus annual. So who agrees to affirm our prior conclusions on the disclosures that's articulated in 3A through E? That's all 7. Okay. With respect to timing, so what we proposed was interim and annual for all of these?
We just propose to retain the existing language in the 470-20 says, as of each date for which the statement for financial position is prepared, or for each period. There's a different interpretation on what those periods refer to. Something refers to both annual and interim. Something is only refers to annual, but we don't want to clarify this language under this project until like the interim reporting project has a more like comprehensive considerations.
Because if you clarify it here, that language is used elsewhere, so you could kind of inadvertently be clarifying all throughout the COD what that means.
That language is pervasive, just for every period, and some people think that means it's mandatory at the quarter, and some people think it means it's subject to the general guidance that says you only have to update if there's a significant change. Their recommendation is do what we've done before and clarify it in
okay.
Yeah.
Christine?
There
you
you
need to
go.
go to training too.
I do. I'm not pushing hard enough. I was also curious about the extent to which we see a lot of confusion in practice because, when you actually looked at the financial reports, I don't think you found any that were providing quarterly statements that didn't include the information. So while I know there's a lot of chatter about there being confusion about the interpretation of the language, it doesn't seem like that was playing out, at least in the data that you were able to collect. So I think we should just stick with the current language for now.
Okay, does anybody, who would like to stick with the current language? I'll ask the question that way. That's right. Okay, that's 7. All right. So now let's go to question 4. I love how they had 22 questions, but we got some sub-questions within them. 60, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So embedded within question 4 are 4 other items. Does anyone have any questions or observations on 4A through D? Okay. The staff's asking us to affirm our prior views on 4A through D. Who agrees with that? That's all 7. Okay. Okay. On to earnings per share, Mary.
Yes. So the next area we're discussing is EPS. There are 6 EPS issues for the board to discuss today, and I'm going to tee up all 6 issues together. First, the board had proposed the diluted EPS for all convertible instruments be calculated using the if converted method. And the board also proposed an amendment to the if converted method to preclude the add back of interest expense for instruments where the principal is required to be settled in cash. The result of these amendments is that EPS will typically be more dilutive as compared to current GAAP for instruments where the issuer has the ability to settle the principal and interest, as well as any conversion premium and any combination of cash or shares. This instrument is typically referred to as Instrument X. For instruments where the principal is required to be cash settled, but the issuer may settle the premium in cash or shares, so this is Instrument C, the EPS result under this modified if converted method will typically be consistent with the results under the treasury stock method that's applied under current GAAP. The staff recommends the board affirm these amendments because they improve consistency in the EPS calculation for convertible instruments. A majority of comment letter respondents agreed with the change, and those that did not agree did not provide any new information for the board to consider. Issues 6 and 7 relate to the share settlement presumption that the board affirmed in December. In the proposed update, the board decided to continue to allow rebuttal of the share settlement presumption for share-based payment arrangements that are liability classified because of anticipated cash settlement. While a majority of comment letter respondents agreed with that exception, 5 respondents suggested that these instruments should not receive an exception because of consistency. The staff recommends affirming the proposed amendment because the staff thinks it would be overly punitive to require a diluted EPS impact for these instruments that have already been presumed to be cash settled. Some comment letter respondents raised questions about whether contingently issuable shares are affected by the board's decisions about instruments that may be settled in cash or shares. The staff does not think that contingently issuable shares are the same as instruments where the holder makes an election about the method of settlement. Therefore, the staff recommends the board clarify that the guidance on contracts that may be settled in cash or shares relates to when there is settlement optionality and does not apply to contingently issuable shares. A comment letter respondent requested clarification about whether share settlement should be presumed if it would be less dilutive than cash settlement. The staff is recommending that the board retain existing guidance in Topic 260 that share settlement should be presumed if it is more dilutive than cash settlement. Issues 8 and 9 relate to clarifications that were included in the proposed update related to these existing guidance. Issue 8 relates to the use of an average share price. The proposed amendments required use of an average share price when calculating the diluted EPS denominator for instruments where the exercise prices may change based on an entity's share price, or changes to the entity's share price impact the number of shares that may be used to settle an instrument. Accordingly, under the proposed amendments, the use of an end-of-period share price would no longer be appropriate. The staff recommends the board affirm this decision because it improves consistency in the EPS calculation, and no new information was provided by comment letter respondents. The second clarification relates to calculation of year-to-date share count. The proposed amendments would clarify that the weighted average from each quarterly diluted EPS calculation be used to determine the year-to-date averages. The staff recommends the board affirm this decision because it improves consistency in the EPS calculation and no new information was provided by comment letters. And then the last EPS issue, issue 10, relates to convertible instruments that include down round features. The proposed amendments added equity classified convertible preferred stock to the scope of the down rounds model in Topic 260. A few comment letter respondents suggested extending this guidance to convertible debt, which the staff does not recommend. The staff is recommending the board affirm its decision so that a down round feature included in a convertible preferred stock will receive the same accounting treatment as down rounds included in equity classified warrants or options. So now I'll turn it over for the board to discuss questions 5 through 10 on EPS.
Thank you. Why don't we just see what board members have questions on questions 5 through 10, and then we'll go from there. Al?
Quick question, and I raised this in a small group meeting. When I was reading paragraph 82 of the board memo, we talked about using an end-of-period price or an average price. I asked the question about, well, is this price weighted, volume weighted, and I know, Mary, you did a little bit of research and said none of the firm guidance talks about this. This part of the calculation just seemed a little antiquated. It was in an era when you went and took the Wall Street Journal from the end of a month or the end of a quarter, and you pulled out a stock price and then used that in your calculation. It seems like we've moved beyond that. I'm not suggesting we change wording or practice, but if we're adding things to monitor in the coming years, this would be an area where I think a little bit more precision would be appreciated, and certainly given the advancements in data collection and everything, this is an area where I'd just look to see if we could refine that. This is a holdover from decades ago, and I don't think it's necessarily needed today.
Jim?
I agree with the staff's recommendation on 6, which was the share-based payments that we're not, while we're changing the presumption language or getting rid of it as it relates to non-share-based payments, we're retaining it for share-based payments. I think it wasn't in the scope, so I'm supportive of that, although I don't see a reason for it. And so I wonder if it's something we could give to the annual improvements team. I don't think it's slightly bigger than, it's certainly not a tech correction, but EPS is not required for private companies. Most public companies don't even have cash settlement provisions. And so it seems like a relatively small set that might be impacted, so why would we retain it? And so I just wondered if it's sort of the nature of an annual improvement.
Gary?
Questions 5 and 8, I think, to me, from an investor viewpoint, it makes the data more comparable. In question 5, if you go to the if converted method, every company follows the same methodology. That's a positive. If a company, after the convert, is now equity, if they want to buy back stock, they can go right ahead and do that. In 8, I think, again, the average share price makes things more comparable.
Okay. Let me go through questions 5 through 10. I'll go through them individually. In question 5, the staff is recommending we affirm our prior decision to require application of the if converted method of calculating diluted earnings per share to all convertible instruments. Who agrees with that? Okay. Question 6, the staff is recommending we affirm our prior conclusion to exclude certain share-based payment arrangements from the scope of the EPS amendments that may be settled in cash or shares. Who agrees with that? Okay. And I agree with Jim. We could send it to the improvements team and they can do some research there. Question 7, the staff is recommending that the guidance on contracts that may be settled in cash not apply to contingently issuable shares, and that share settlement should not be presumed if cash settlement is more dilutive than the share settlement. Who agrees with that? Okay. Question 8, the staff is recommending that we affirm our prior decision to clarify that an average share price should be used in calculating diluted EPS for the denominator for instruments for which the exercise price may change based on any share price, or changes in any share price may affect the number of shares that may be used to settle the financial instruments. Who agrees with that? Okay. Question 9, staff's recommending we affirm our prior conclusion to make a technical correction to clarify the calculation of year-to-date weighted average shares. Who agrees with that? And question 10, staff's recommending we affirm our prior conclusion to include convertible preferred shares within the scope of the down round model. Who agrees with that? Okay. I didn't say who agrees with the down round model, Hal. I saw his body language. Okay. All right.
See, we're already halfway through the question.
We're doing good. Okay.
All right. We're going to move on to the derivative scope exception. So at the December 11th board meeting, the board affirmed amendments in the proposed update to remove 3 of the settlement conditions related to unregistered shares, collateral, and shareholder rights. Today, the board will redeliberate the remaining proposed amendments related to the derivative scope exception. First, we will discuss issues 11 through 13 of the derivative scope exception aspect of the project, which is described in Board Memo 34 and in the board handout in paragraphs 17 through 20. The staff will separately tee up issue 14 after we discuss 11 through 13. So first, issue 11 relates to various technical corrections and improvements that are listed in paragraph 18 of the board handout. Almost all comment letter respondents that commented on these amendments supported them. The staff thinks that the comment letter respondents did not provide any new information that would cause the board to reconsider their proposed amendments. Therefore, the staff is recommending that the board affirm the technical corrections and improvements. Next, issue 12 relates to incomplete subsequent measurement guidance for freestanding instruments that fail the indexation criterion in current GAAP. For instruments that fail the settlement criterion, these instruments must be asset or liability classified, and the guidance explicitly requires that they be measured at fair value. The proposed amendments would require instruments that fail the indexation criteria to be measured through fair value, at fair value through net income, so it would align with the settlement failure. The board decided on fair value because this typically is what is being applied in practice. A few respondents observed that the fair value requirement may include contracts that were previously not fair valued and have some notion of indexation. The staff acknowledges that increased fair value measurement for some instruments would be a consequence of affirming the proposed amendments, but that it would be impractical to attempt to remove certain contracts from the scope of the requirement. So the staff is recommending the board affirm this proposed amendment. Lastly, issue 13 relates to disclosures. The proposed amendments added a disclosure objective for section 815.40.50 as described in paragraph 20 of the board handout. There were no comment letter respondents that provided feedback on the disclosure objective. However, there were a few respondents that requested additional information be disclosed, such as standard anti-dilution provisions and more explicit disclosure about settlement options. The staff recommends the board affirm the proposed disclosure objective. The staff does not recommend the board add additional disclosures, but based on board member feedback, the staff plans to make some improvements to the wording of certain disclosures through the drafting process. So with that, I'll turn it over for discussion of questions 11 through 13.
Thank you, Mary. Are there any questions about the staff's research or recommendations on questions 11 through 13? Okay. Staff is recommending we affirm 6 different technical corrections that have been exposed as articulated in paragraphs 11A through F in the board handout. Who agrees with that? That's 7. Okay, with respect to question 12, the staff is recommending that we affirm our prior decision to expand the scope of subsequent measurement guidance to include instruments that failed the indexation criteria. Who agrees with that? And in question 13, the staff is recommending we affirm our prior decision to add a disclosure objective, that we not add additional disclosure requirements, but we do improve the wording to promote better clarity and understandability. Who agrees with that? Okay, so that's 7-0. Okay.
Okay, so now we'll move on to issue 14. Issue 14 relates to the remaining derivative scope exception proposed amendments, specifically the remote likelihood threshold and the related reassessment and disclosure proposals. Related to these proposals, the board will discuss 3 packages of alternatives as described in paragraph 21 of the board handout because these issues are all interrelated. Package 1 would affirm the amendments that were in the proposed update with some improvements. Package 2 would remove these amendments from the scope of the project in the final update. Package 3 would spin these off, and instead of pursuing a remote likelihood threshold in this project, the board would decide whether to explore one or more previously considered approaches as a separate project. Approaches to be explored could include an alternative probability threshold, such as probable, standard anti-dilution approach, or predominantly derived from the stock price or topic 480 approach. Comment letter respondents had mixed views over this aspect of the project. After the December board meeting, the staff performed outreach with audit regulators and analyzed specific suggestions from comment letter respondents to identify whether the remote threshold could be improved to increase its operability. The staff thinks that remote is a well-understood term in the accounting world and is used many times throughout GAAP, and we are not aware of any significant issues in its application today. Qualitative thresholds are inherently subjective because they allow an entity to exercise its own judgment and make its own determination based on its individual facts and circumstances. The remote threshold would require cost and complexity, which do not exist today. However, if the threshold is met, there would be cost savings of equity classification because of the reduction in fair value measurements. The question is whether the cost of evaluating the remote threshold would be justified by the benefits of the equity classification and the reduction in fair value measurements. Additionally, a question exists of whether remote would be auditable. Although remote is used many times throughout GAAP, the length of judgment in this application may be greater as compared to other areas of GAAP that currently use the term, because contracts in an entity's own equity may have terms of up to 10 years. Feedback from audit regulators was inconclusive on the auditability of remote. Based on the mixed feedback from comment letter respondents and other stakeholders, including the audit regulators, the staff cannot determine whether the remote threshold would be operable and/or auditable. The threshold was originally included in the scope of this project to reduce financial statement restatements, and based on the mixed feedback, the staff cannot determine that the remote threshold and reduced reassessment requirement would achieve the objective, or whether it may ultimately increase cost and complexity. Therefore, the staff is recommending that the board not affirm its previous decisions in this area. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the board for discussion of questions 14 and 14B in the handout. Just to clarify, if you decide on package 3 to spin off the project, we're not asking for any decisions on which alternative to pursue, but if you have any leanings that you'd like to share to help inform our research, we'd be happy to hear thoughts at this point too. So I'll turn it over to the board.
Okay. Hal.
Gotten the touch. There we go. Okay. On package 2, you made the observation in the board memo that if we went down a package 2 approach, you'd be following basically what the IASB was doing. Do you have a sense of timing on the IASB's project?
So they had their discussion paper, and they've been having discussions with their board about kind of the path forward, and I think they're kind of in the preliminary stages of that. We've been in touch with them, and as they have board meetings, we'll stay informed, but I don't think we have any timeline of an ED or anything like that at this point.
Okay, thanks.
Jim?
So I am fine with the staff's recommendation not to pursue the remote threshold further. I wondered if it had promise, at least at the outset, although my preferred approach, I think, all along was really more one of predominance, which is the 150 or 480 model, because I've wondered why we have two different sets of tests for indexation. Seems odd to me that we'd say indexation means one thing in the context of 480 and a different thing in the context of these types of instruments, or confusion about when am I in, or do I have to do both? I would have thought that sort of one indexation model would work. And what I like about that indexation model is it doesn't put as much pressure on probability assessments if, when the event occurs, the adjustment is small, because it also, the indexation there is one of predominance. So even if the event is likely of occurrence, but the adjustment is small, it wouldn't necessarily fail a predominance test. So seems to take a lot of pressure off of likelihood assessments, and it's something people should be familiar with. I know you're not asking for votes today. Certainly there's issues we'd have to ferret out if we were to follow that approach. But that leads me to take it out of the scope of this and put it into a separate project, and at least in that project pursue that, maybe other ideas that make sense as well.
Sue?
I got it on the first go. I guess I'm a little disappointed that we haven't been able to make the remote, what we proposed, operational. I think I was really encouraged that this would be a significant improvement. But I was also encouraged by the outreach that we did with particularly the Auditing Standards Board. And I thought that the information that they gave us really was helpful to me in terms of how they talked about how remote would be audited, and this notion of positive evidence and negative evidence. And particularly when you couple that with a reassessment trigger, perhaps, because it ends up being counter to each other. I'm also torn because some of the feedback that we got from the comment letter responses, and I think you noted in paragraph 69, they said that several comment letter respondents would prefer the board finalize the remote threshold as it is rather than abandon it altogether. But that said, I'm personally just not comfortable doing that if we don't think it's going to be operational, and I don't think it's going to have the intended result that we thought. So with that in mind, I think that I would be supportive of spinning this off and exploring a different option, and I would look at the predominance path that you had suggested. And I'm really thinking about that in terms of what's giving me some perspective on that is also the outreach that we did with how it's audited in terms of other thresholds and other issues that we'd have with trying to make that operational. So that's.
Christine?
There we go. So I was just wondering if the staff could elaborate a little bit more on the approaches that would be considered under a package 3 if we go forward. Because I noticed in your tee-up, you were very careful to say that we would just look at previously considered approaches. This project's been going on for 3 years. We've had a lot of input on the 3 approaches that sort of have been floated in the lead up to our decisions, the predominantly approach, the standard anti-dilution, and then going to some other probability thresholds. So I'm just curious as to what additional, what is it that the staff thinks they can do in order to get us more information to overcome some of the reasons why we decided not to go down those paths in the first place.
So as you pointed out, I mean, the approaches that are listed as possible approaches forward are, considered and dismissed in the basis for conclusion. So we don't think, we could just dust any of those off and, go straight ahead. We'd have to do some research on there if there's ways to improve them. And I think if we open up to those 3 packages, we'd also consider, through outreach with the firms and other stakeholders, whether there's other, feasible approaches to consider. So I think, we have a good starting point from work we did before the remote threshold was selected, but certainly there's much work to be done on how to make that operable, considering what some of the prior feedback was on some of the flaws of any of those approaches.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that gives me quite a bit of pause. So I think my preference would be package 2 to just cut bait at this point. But if we do end up in a package 3, then it probably comes as no surprise that, I find it confusing, frankly, that we have a fixed for fixed principle, but then we have all of this guidance to say, now how can we violate that principle? And so I always felt that the standard anti-dilution approach was going to be the more simple, straightforward approach. We heard that. I understand that there's concerns over additional fair value estimation, but there's things that we could do for private companies and in terms of an alternative there. So anyway, I always felt that standard anti-dilution was an approach that could be considered, but I also would agree that it's not a viable approach because there's just not the broad support for it. So when I look at these, for a variety of reasons, none of them appear to me to be viable, and I'm just not sure what we're going to learn from next steps that's going to make any of these more viable. So that's why I end up in a package 2.
Marcia?
I also got it in one touch. Okay. What I just like to say is the work in this particular topic, I agree with Sue that it's disappointing. We've gone through a number of questions. We've gone through a lot of areas where the feedback was somewhat consistent, and then we hit this issue as it relates to this big project. I'm actually supportive of going ahead and carving this out into a separate project because I don't want to lose the momentum on the parts of this project for which there is a lot of unanimous agreement and clear improvements. As it relates to this particular topic, I just want to indicate that I would look forward to continued research on the actual predominance. I don't believe that that's one that we've explored to the extent that we've explored the other 2 alternatives. And if you were asking for leanings, that would be where I would be right now.
That's a second.
It's a lot of pressure. Everyone else can do the button and I can't. I think I'm much closer to Christine in my views. I'm more comfortable with package 2, and I asked about the ISB earlier because I'm at a point where we have explored virtually every of the options in package 3, and I'm not certain what we're going to gain. So I was hoping that by taking a little bit of a pause, sitting back, seeing how the ISB's discussion develops before we launched into a package 3 approach. If a majority of the board wants to go down to package 3, I would hope that we would do it in unison with the ISB. Because I don't think there's, certainly of the three alternatives listed, I'm not really comfortable with any of the three that are listed in package 3. But if we were going to come up with a solution, I'd prefer to have it a converged solution, so at least we get some benefit out of it. So I'm a little hesitant to go down alternative package 3 approach